Release that witch eye by Ermu. Chapter 221 Rescue Plan. Since he had decided on his course of action, the first question he faced was, should he himself also travel to King City? This would be Border Town's first military operation away from the western region, and it would also be different than the two defensive wars prior to it. Certainly, they would come across unfamiliar environmental circumstances which could cause complications. Whether they could display their combat ability without a prepared battlefield was still unknown. All this made it hard for him to feel relief in the event that he didn't go to King City. On the one hand, he knew that his own military experience was extremely limited, but on the other, his understanding of war could still be regarded as the highest level for this era. But the moment he left Border Town, the western region would become unclaimed land. If the message of this were to reach Longsong's stronghold, it would be a foolish hope to believe that Petrov could prevent all the other noble families from moving, trying to take advantage. As long as people were willing to disclose this information to Timothy, perhaps he would not care if he had to suffer a calamity at the front lines or in his backyard caused by the witches. But if he knew that Roland was near King City, it would be strange if he didn't assemble his army to encircle him. Even if it didn't come to that, even if Timothy let him off, as long as he commanded his soldiers to move from the northern region to the western region, Roland would be in an equally tight situation. Generally speaking, compared with suffering a defeat at the front line, a fire in one's own backyard was several times more severe. In the end, Roland decided to stay in Border Town. After all, the First Army's primary task would be to protect the witches, while their second task would be to split the fugitives into small groups and let them on board the ships. So rather than fearing an encounter with Timothy in King City, it would be more likely that they would have to face the church's army of judges. But as long as the rescue measures were carried out correctly, and nothing unexpected happened, they won't even need to let loose a single shot. Of course, this meant that he would have to make sure that the rescue plan was as perfect as possible. At noon that day, Roland called Carter, Iron Axe, Brian and the members of the Witch Union over. The fourth prince only had some fuzzy childhood impressions of the land surrounding King City, but this was a problem which could be easily solved. He asked Soraya to draw a simple map on top of the dining table in the living room. He then began giving Iron Axe and Brian their commands. This central square represents King City and the blue line depicts the canal. Roland said well and thought, you have two tasks, the first is to protect the witches while they cure the fugitives, and afterward you are to bring them back to Border Town. Your second duty is to prevent the demonic plague from further spreading in King City. For this, you should be aware that the epidemic is most likely being caused by the church. What? Brian was shocked, not daring to believe his ears. Carter raised his brows. While Iron Axe's expression didn't change at all, after all, he was a follower of the three gods, just like the other Sand people were, and because of that he had no worship for the church or any belief in their claims, which left Roland with a very pleased feeling towards him. After the church's permanent annexation of the Kingdom of Endless Winter, they immediately started their attack on the Wolfshark Kingdom. After they've conquered the Wolfshark Kingdom, it is only a matter of time before the Kingdom of Dawn and Grey Castle become their next goal. In fact, the whole battle for the throne is already by itself worthy of skepticism. The prince went through the details how the church was helping Timothy in the north, Garcia in the southwest and himself by supplying them with the pills. In the light of this information we can see that they aren't supporting who they think will be the next heir, but instead they are encouraging us to kill each other off. By swallowing their pills, it also becomes improbable that our soldiers will turn into veterans. On the contrary, after taking the pills, their whole body will become weak, and they will die a gruesome death. This time the same can be said about the disease. After the demonic disease has spread all over King City, the church will finally declare that they have the antidote, which ironically won't be distributed for the benefit of the people. Only the light which shines in the darkest of places is the most dazzling. Iron Axe opened his mouth. That's right, if you want to be seen as a savior, you have to come to the people at their most painful moment. The stronger experience the contrast, the deeper will be their impression of the church. As for the innocent who died in the middle of the road, those are merely the sacrifices whose belief was not sincere enough, Roland stated. So we will have to save the refugees from the east, but at the same time we also have to try to destroy the church's conspiracy. After taking a deep breath to calm himself down, Brian asked, "How should we do that?" "You have to hide as much as possible, trying to fulfill your duties in such a way that the other side doesn't perceive you." Roland points to a wide area on the outskirts of the canal, south of the pier. Here, the land should be covered with crops, making it very suitable to hide at. There you should also find a high point, which allows you to establish lookout to scout out the pier. The soldiers responsible for providing support will disguise themselves as caravan guards once more and help the already treated people to get on board. I will write Merchant Margaret a letter, asking her to provide me with as many ships as possible, not only the 2 fleets which are already involved with the transportation. Whether it is Longsong Stronghold or Greycastle's capital, there are only a few big cities patrol forces who can cover the surrounding area. Most of the time their investigation and warning area depends on how far they can see when staying on the city wall. So, the area south of the pier should be outside of their patrol area. When we then locate our troops at this point, it is unlikely for them to raise the city guard's attention. "How do you want to treat the sick?" Iron Axe asked. "This task will largely depend on Lily's replica," Roland roughly explained to them the young woman's unusual ability, making it unnecessary to walk into the fugitive camp to heal these people. In other words, since any microorganism can become a replica, you only have to collect the river water and let her purify it steadily. Afterward, you only have to give it to those who are sick to drink. "Like that?" He gawked at Roland, totally disbelieving. "There are 2 points you have to take note of." The prince raised 2 fingers. "First, you have to ensure that every person on board had drunken the purified water, and second, you are absolutely prohibited from boiling the drinking water to clean it. In fact, the dirtier the water, the better it would be. It would contain more microorganism, which means that the number of replicas in it will also be more. You might be unable to understand this, but as long as you do what I told you, everything will be okay." "What about the patients in King City? Will we treat them the same way?" "Almost, but the medicine cannot be delivered by our people, that would be too obvious. This task will fall under Theo's responsibility," Roland decided. "As long as they get their money, the street rats' work efficiency will be very high." "Your Royal Highness, those street rats aren't reliable. As long as it's profitable, they may stab you in the back at any time." Carter objected. "Therefore the second part is only to prevent it as much as possible and isn't necessary to be completed." The prince stood up. "The moment you sense something amiss, the First Army must immediately protect the witches and withdraw. As long as we are able to receive the refugees smoothly, it's already our victory, regardless of how many people we were able to save in King City. Undermining the church's plan isn't possible to achieve by just relying on purified water. As long as we can disprove their claim that only the holy elixir can repel the evil spirits, their set game has already failed. Finally, I will now declare the people who will travel to King City," he shouted. "Iron Axe." "Yes. You will lead 240 soldiers who will be responsible for protecting the witches and controlling the canal, for this eliminating every potential threat. Be sure to bring back the witches and the refugees." "I will do as you bid, Your Highness." Iron Axe stood straight and saluted. "Brian." "Yes." The young knight stuck out his chest. "You will lead 60 soldiers disguised as mercenaries, and you will be in charge of the medicine delivery, and make sure that the refugees will maintain order when boarding the ships." "As you command, Your Highness." Next are the witches. This time leaving to King City by ship will be Nightingale, Echo, Lightning, and Wendy. Roland's voice slowed down. "Your task will be somewhat unique, so that I will explain it in a little while. Now it is only important to note that you always pay attention to your own security, ensuring your safe return." "Rest assured, Your Highness." Nightingale patted her chest. "I will be with them." Roland nodded. "In that case, we come to the final point, which is also the most important aspect. After arriving in King City, the army can stay there for 3 days at most. After these 3 days, no matter how the actual situation is, you must return to Border Town." He emphasized every word. In case the church plans to destroy the resistance of Greycastle, they certainly won't spread the disease only to King City. most likely the western region will also be one of their goals. So you cannot stay in King City for longer than these 3 days, do you understand? Yes, Your Highness. Iron Axe and Brian answered in unison. Very well, then let us carry out this plan. Hold on. Your Highness, what will I do? Carter raised his hand. You will lead the rest of the First Army and guard my border town. Roland patted his shoulder. Chapter 222 The Long-Awaited Victory. Fjord, Sea Dragon Bay. The church's follower had boarded the wall, shooting crossbow arrows towards the witches, but confronted with Shabby's invisible barrier and Molly's magical servant, their attempts at resistance showed little results. All their arrows would suddenly drop or be swallowed into the servant's belly. Only when the other side embedded their arrows with small pieces of God's punishment stones did they become a threat. But in the end, the amount of God's punishment stones were limited, and every witch who was unfortunately enough and got hit would immediately be carried back to get treated. As long as the blood loss was stopped in time, their lives wouldn't be in danger. After 2 or 3 rounds of shooting, more than 20 witches already advanced to the edge of the wall. Ashes directly jumped on top of the wall, disposing of those believers who dared to show their heads. After a few days of pre-war investigation, they knew the weaknesses of the wall like the back of their hand. From high up in the sky, a variety of pigeon cries could be heard. It was Maggie that was signaling that everyone had reached the correct position. Having gone through several fights had bestowed Lotus with the experience to exhibit her ability without the slightest hesitation. The ground suddenly shook and began to rise. Seeing this, some of the church's followers rushed forward to try and stop her, but in the end, they were all beheaded by Ashes one after another. It didn't take long for the wall, which wasn't embedded with God's stone of retaliation, to begin to collapse. Followed by an attack of the witches who swarmed into the opened-up space, and continuously made use of their ability to assault the believers. In a flash they had killed more than half of those who did not have a God's stone of retaliation protecting them. And those who still stood were smoothly and clean harvested by Ashes. This was the first time since the church was built that they suffered a direct assault. Moreover, the opposite side was the church's sworn enemy. The priest that was stationed there also knew that the end of the day was coming, so he called out to his followers to take the pills and sacrifice themselves for God. 10 of those believers who had turned mad rushed towards Ashes, and used their flesh to try and stop her, while the rest of them threw themselves at Lotus. Seeing this, Lotus raised an already prepared earthen wall from the ground, temporarily blocking the enemy with it. With the God's stone of retaliation being unable to eliminate already completed magical results, they had to first go around the wall, but by that time the place behind the wall was already as empty. Without any better option, the furious believer turned around, once more besieging Ashes. But at that moment the witches again appeared behind their back and in this way caught them off guard. After half an hour of fighting and suffering repeated losses, the ground was covered with the bodies of the church's followers, ultimately leaving the priest left standing. While trembling he threw the pills into his mouth, but before he even had the time to swallow, Ashes had come over and cut off his arm. Damn you, you evil creature! You devil-cursed monster! Holding his cut-off end of his arm with his other hand full of fear, the priest roared hysterically. Are you scared? Have you ever thought about their feelings when you tortured and killed those innocent? Ashes stated coldly, compared with us witches, scum like you resemble a devil's minion much more, you who does not shrink away from any crime. So, feel at ease when I send you back to hell to report. Ending her speech, her sword fell, cutting his curse and his head off. Did we win? Molly arrived at her side, her voice and face full of disbelief. Yes, Ashes sighed in relief. This was the last church in the fjord. From here on, there is no longer any stronghold left on the islands. We won. Although the church's power in the fjord was feeble, with merely 100 believers within every church and no stationed army of judges, this was still the first time that the witches had confronted the church head-on and managed to win. From fleeing in all direction when they heard the grass rustled in the wind. Until now, where they managed to conquer the church, knocking down the huge monster of the past, even if it was only a negligible part of the church, it was enough to excite all of the witches. Just as she had expected, after everyone confirmed the long-awaited victory, they could not help but cheer loudly. In the hearts of all the witches, the church was like an overbearing mountain, and now, when they had made the first step to climbing this mountain, permit them to see the first trace of the shining light of dawn. From now on, the fjord had become their real homeland. We won. Long live Her Majesty, Tilly. Goo. After traveling back to the island by boat, Ashes couldn't wait to return to Tilly's residence and tell her the news that the witches had thoroughly won. But when she met up with her, the latter only stroked her silk-like gray hair behind her ear, revealed a bright smile and said, "Maggie has already informed me. I heard that you all are safe and sound. This is really great. Indeed, compared to sailing, it is a lot faster to turn into a seabird and fly back." Ashes looked around and took in the surrounding, but she was unable to see the familiar figure. "Maggie? She left immediately after reporting on your victory." Tilly shook her head helplessly. Hearing this, Ashes couldn't help but feel shocked. She already returned to the western border? Well, Tilly said with a chuckle, maybe she found a very good friend over there. After just a few days, she already couldn't wait any longer and asked if she could return. If it weren't for the fact that we needed her help to beat the church, I'm afraid that after delivering the letter, she would have turned around and flown straight back on that same day. I'm getting more and more curious about the other side. For a while, Ashes hesitated, but then she asked, should I not have left her there? No, that was excellent, the fifth princess responded with a firm voice. It is only because you left Maggie in Border Town that we could easily get in touch with the other side. Furthermore, I also let her take my reply along and pass it on to Roland Wimbledon. She made a grimace. Care to guess what I replied to him? You refused him, of course. Crossing the sea to reach this island was already full of risk. How could we then send any witches to the western region? No, I agreed to his request. Tilly smiled. Furthermore, I also briefed him about the abilities of the non-combat witches and said in the letter that as long as he can guarantee the safety of the witches, I will consider sending some witches to Border Town. What was it that he said? Oh, that's right. Deepening our friendship by learning and observing together, both of us progressing hand in hand. She paused. If it becomes necessary, I can even go over to Border Town myself. Your Royal Highness. Ashes could not stop herself from shouting out her former honorific title in shock. I know what you are worried about, but right now the biggest enemy of us witches is the church. What this means is, only by having more allies can we have more power. That we have dealings with the various islands of the fjord is because of the beneficial relations it brings, while the Witch Cooperation Association in Border Town can be seen as a natural friend to us. So why don't you show them some goodwill? Tilly laughed. Moreover, according to Maggie, it is possible to evolve your ability again by learning knowledge about it. If the witches we send there learn this technique, Sleeping Island would also benefit from it. But for you to go in person, in case the other party. Tilly reached out with her hand to cut her off. Rest assured, I did not mean that I will leave immediately. As long as the situation isn't clear, I won't take the risk and go there. And also do not forget that Sylvie can see through all kinds of camouflage, no matter if it is fine makeup or a magical illusion, nothing can escape her eyes. As long as she belongs to the first batch of people we send over to Border Town, she will be able to help me find out the truth behind the fourth prince. Besides, even if there was any kind of danger, won't you still be at my side? Ashes looked for a long time into her eyes, until she finally nodded. Of course, we can wait until Maggie returns next month, before we speak about this any further. Tilly laughed. Right now we have more important things we need to do. What? Ashes asked, somewhat surprised. Now, after all the strongholds of the church in the fjords had been destroyed, it seemed that the rest of their objectives would just be to peacefully continue to develop Sleeping Island, but when she looked at the expression of the other, it didn't look like that was the case. The fifth princess pointed to the white silk gloves with the red gem on it. There aren't only ruins to be found in the kingdoms of the mainland, there are also ancient ruins on the fjord's shadow islands. Most likely the sea folk's magic stones are coming from there. Taking advantage of the destruction of the church, I want to go and take a look for myself. Is this about the legend of the ghost Shadow Red River? After having to do with the fjords for some time, Ashes had also heard of this legend. The remains were hidden in the sea, appearing and disappearing from time to time. Moreover, within the surroundings are many dangerous undercurrents and sea monsters, which makes it impossible for ordinary people to reach it. Since they were discovered for the first time, many explorers, in order to look at this inconceivable marvel, were hit by misfortune and were now buried at the Shadow Islands. You also do not know the certain position of the ruins, so how do you want to enter them? Maybe I do not know where it is, but I know someone who can take us there. In fact, this great explorer is currently on Sleeping Island, and it was also he who first discovered these ruins. Tilly smiled. Chapter 223 Premeditation. During these days, Theo stayed in an inn of King's City, anxiously waiting for the reply from Border Town. A towering inner wall divided King's City into two separate worlds, and the people would be strictly controlled when entering or leaving. No matter if they were aristocrats or wealthy merchants, everyone could only enter after going through a thorough inspection inside of a small room. Once they had any sign of disease, such as fever, flushes, or dark spots, they were not allowed inside. In case they left the inner city, they would have to return in the evening hours at the latest. Otherwise, when the sun went down, the gates would be closed and they would have to spend the night outside. But this still couldn't stop the spread of demonic plague. Yesterday he had heard the rumors that there were also nobles living in the inner city who had become infected. In case the church had not finally released their first batch of holy elixir, Theo believed that the nobles would have soon started to evacuate from King's City. 6 days after sending out the letter, he was finally informed by Margaret's Chamber of Commerce that news had arrived. He hastily rushed to the agreed location, a tailor shop, where on arrival he was led into the basement by the clerk, and there he met the Chamber of Commerce's owner, who had been waiting for a long time now. On entering he saw Margaret sitting at a low table. A pot of ice water was placed in front of her, which continuously emitted bursts of cold air. Theo, who was sweating from rushing over, sat himself cross-legged on the opposite side, only to suddenly feel a surge of cold breeze on his face, which immediately lifted his spirits. "His Highness asked me to give you this letter." With these words Margaret handed him a sheepskin envelope. Taking a closer look, the envelope's sealing wax seemed to still be intact. Theo was impatient to open the message. The letter he had taken out gave him a brief account of the operation plan, the news that the army had set out, as well as the tasks he himself had to complete. After carefully reading through it again, he put the letter into his pocket, looked towards Margaret and asked, "Was there anything else His Highness requested you to do?" "No, he just asked me to send a messenger informing you about the letter's arrival." "Of course, since it was an express delivery there are some extra charges. I was free so I already wrote it into the account." "Kiki, all right." Theo cleared his throat. "His Royal Highness wants all the refugees to be transported to Border Town in the shortest amount of time, so he wants you to supply a lot of ships for an uninterrupted transportation, not only those 2 fleets." "Even if they are already infected?" Margaret asked with great interest. "I do not think he wanted to turn the whole Western Territory into a death zone, so, has His Highness found a way to cure the demonic plague?" "He did indeed," he nodded. "In fact, there were already infected people present on the first transport. At the time we send them out the disease had merely not broken out yet, only when they came close to Border Town was it discovered. They are already on their way back to King's City, with all crew members on board, safe and sound." "His Royal Highness is indeed an incredible man, even the church wasn't able to come up with an antidote so quickly," Margaret exclaimed. "Then, how many days does he intend to use for the boarding of the refugees?" "A week?" Theo stretched out 3 fingers. "This, impossible." For a moment, the businesswoman was stunned, only to repeatedly shake her head soon after. "Even if half of those people died, there will still be more than 5,000 people. Being able to transport them within 3 days means that I will need to prepare nearly 100 ships. Even if the Chamber of Commerce stops all its other shipping transportation, I would just about to meet this number. However, this way the losses I would suffer will be in the thousands of gold royals or more. And the loss I would make by losing, because that is uncountable. Even if the steam engine was to become free of charge it still wouldn't be enough. So, I am afraid I have to refuse." If all the people were sitting on the deck, rather than lying in beds in the cabins, the number of individuals a ship could carry would be doubled, Theo insisted. Furthermore, as long as we don't pay attention to their comfort, the two masters which are used for the transportation of ore can also be used to move the people. As long as the top of the hatch is opened, one ship can then load about 200 people at the same time. This kind of vessels, your old friend Hogg should have a lot of it, right? He should definitely have several ships of this type. In Silver City, Margaret still looked a little hesitant. Moreover, according to your arithmetic, it should probably be possible to reduce the number of ships needed to 50. But, this really isn't a good deal. Theo also had the same thoughts, allowing dozens of ships to converge on top of the canal. Just the scheduling and coordinating would require an enormous amount of energy. Also, all the charter costs would be paid out of their own pocket. After expending such a large amount of effort and taking all that trouble, the harvest wouldn't account for all the work that was needed. This really couldn't be regarded as a good deal. At this point, he could only put forth the final resort. At the end of the letter His Highness wrote a short line: "If Margaret doesn't want to help, tell her that lightning is also coming." Reading the sentence had made him a little puzzled. Is there any particular relationship between the businesswoman and the cute, little blonde girl? Looking at their appearances it doesn't seem like that, but His Royal Highness must have his own reasons when he speaks so certainly of it. Coming to this conclusion, Theo slowly opened his mouth. There is a reason why there is no alternative than concluding the transportation within 3 days. What His Highness is doing is the equivalent of going into a tiger's den to seize its food. If this is dragged out for too long, the church might be coming to their door, and lightning is also within their ranks. If they discover the existence of a witch, it might become dangerous for her. What did you just say? Her voice suddenly rose up. Lightning is coming? His Highness' letter did indeed say so. Theo put on his most honest face, probably, in order to guide the troops and offer an early warning. After all, we are currently within the domain of the new king. I got it. Margaret stood up. When do you need a vessel? They ought to arrive in 4 days in case they aren't delayed on the way. I will go to my greatest extent to arrange it. She went to her desk to the side, took up her pen and began to write. But I have a condition: you have to tell me the position of His Highness' troops. So that in the case that they want to enter the city, I can arrange adequate rooms for them. All right, it seems that this trick is indeed useful. I think this point shouldn't be a problem. Theo was secretly delighted. In addition, I have one more thing I will need your help with. Speak, Margaret sighed. I need a procession of carts with wine barrels. The more barrels there are, the better. But they mustn't be filled with ale or wine, but with river or well water. According to His Highness' letter, the crucial person to solve the demonic plague is the witch Lily. She can transform ordinary water into a cure for the disease. But there is a dangerous flaw in His Highness' plan. If the street rats were allowed to come near the camp and get to know that there were people who could continuously produce the holy elixir, I bet that on the next day everyone in the city would come to know about it. River and well water? Margaret raised her eyebrows. Are you sure? Rest assured, His Royal Highness will pay for this. Theo declared laughingly. In considerations of confidentiality and security, transporting the water from the troops' camp to King's City could only be done by him personally. In case he would just carry a water bag to cure the fugitives from the eastern region of the demonic plague, it would not only be troublesome, but its efficiency would also be very low. Because of this he had to come up with a method which allowed him to bring as much of the purified water through as possible in one round. Installing a large barrel on a cart was clearly a good choice. Chapter 224 Launching the Rescue Plan. After learning that His Highness' side had a method to cure the demonic plague, Theo's irritable mood finally calmed down. Once there was something he could busy himself with, the following days seemed to go by a lot faster. In addition to his visits to the wine estates at the outskirts of King's City, he also planned the route for the convoy, while keeping the topography of the area around the canal's pier and the city gate in mind. Nowadays, wanting to enter the city had become quite a hassle. Using the refugees outside of King's City as the reason, all the major city gates had been sealed. In this way prohibiting any outsider from entering the city, especially after the church had begun to distribute the holy elixir. After the refugees became aware of this, they began to desperately attack the city gates every day, hoping to be allowed to go to the church for treatment. However, the guards stationed at the wall responded without hesitation and flocked them with crossbow bolts. The result was that by now many corpses were lying in front of the city gates and rotting under the scorching sun, spreading an unpleasant odor. The only open gate was a side gate limited to the use of the nobility and the merchants who brought the food. Fortunately, Theo had worked in the patrol for some time, and because of that he was known by most of the guards as a native of King's City, allowing him to go through the gate with just a simple greeting. It was precisely because of this quarantine that both the inner and outer city lost almost all contact, so even when they had transported the refugees away with great fanfare, the news of it had difficulty spread into the inner city. Not to mention that the upper nobility were anxiously waiting for someone to ship all the refugees from the eastern region away and save them from later having to suppress a rebellion. Theo roughly understood why His Highness had set out on the same day he had received the letter. All these people outside of the city felt as if they had been abandoned by their king. So, in case the church sent out some priest to heal them, they would become their most faithful of believers. But if His Highness could arrive before the church could grab them, these people would instead be pulled to his side. There was no doubt that after healing them and offering them a new place to stay, they would become His Highness' most fanatical of supporters. On the morning of the fourth day, the returning First Fleet arrived at the canal's pier on time. Theo was surprised to discover that His Highness had sent as many as 300 soldiers of the First Army, who were furthermore all dressed in their standard uniform and armed with revolver rifles. With this powerful contingent as a safeguard, even if the church came to know about them, he estimated that they would still be unable to prevent the refugees from leaving. Lightning. Margaret, who also waited at the pier, immediately shouted when she saw the little girl's figure, unable to containing herself from going forward and hugging her. "This is?" Iron Axe asked. "The owner of the Grand Chamber of Commerce, Ms. Margaret," Theo explained. "All the ships we need for the transportation will be provided by her or a partner of hers. Without her we would never be able to implement His Highness' plan." So, it was like this. After understanding the situation, Iron Axe nodded to her. "Thank you for your help. I'll deduct all my expense from His Highness' fee." Margaret merely shrugged. "But when you're thanking me, you should also thank Lightning." Lightning crooked head and asked confused, "Why me?" "Kiki, it's nothing." Theo coughed twice. "What are you going to do next?" "Next we will set up a camp in the south of the dock to control the area, and then in the afternoon we will start the rescue mission." Iron Axe said, "If the ships could be here by then, that would be for the best." Asterisk. When Brian led his men into the refugee area, he could not help but frown. Everywhere he looked he saw dying people. Their skin had split open at many places, with black blood continuously flowing out of them and attracting swarms of flies. However, those ill people didn't even have the strength left to drive the insects off, simply letting these flying insects crawl all over their body and drink of their blood. Seeing all this, he couldn't help but think of the months of demons, when the people of Border Town were trapped in the slums of Longsong Stronghold, having to face death by hunger and coldness, but being utterly helpless against it. If all this was really done by the church, it was a simply unforgivable crime. "Let's call the first group," Brian said. "We depend on you, Miss Echo." If they rashly went within the crowd and announced that they were in possession of medicine to cure the ill, it would most likely cause a ruckus. And when a large group of refugees went into the direction of the docks all at once, their small group of dozens of people would simply not be enough to suppress them. Because of this, they had to make sure that the information was always only spread to a select small groups at the same time. Considering this problem, His Highness had decided to specially send Miss Echo along. With her ability, Echo was able to control the area within which her voice would be heard, or she could also just put her voice next to a person's ear. Even though Brian saw how she opened her mouth to speak, he was unable to hear any sound, while the fugitives turned around and looked over. Soon, a group of them came over, more stumbling than running. "Your Honor, is what you said really true? As long as you can cure the disease, I am willing to follow you to the western region." "Of course it's true. Our ships have stopped at the pier, so gather your family and come with me. Other soldiers also stepped forward to help the patients who laid on the ground and were unable to move. Their small group instantly expanded to several hundred people, who walked together in the direction of the pier. Many people who noticed this scene also began to follow, doing their best to catch up with them. Back to the pier, soldiers of the First Army had already filled with bags with purified water and placed them on a long table. At the gangway to board the ship stood Iron Axe with a squadron, letting only 2 people through at the same time, and ensuring that all the people who wanted to embark had first drunk in the curing water. Everybody listens, these water bags are filled with medicine that treats the illness, so as long as you drink from it, you will immediately recover. Next, to the long table, they had set up a stage on which stood the one with the highest standing amongst the soldiers, constantly preaching His Highness manuscript, what the church has called the demonic plague caused by witches and could only be dispelled by their holy elixir is a groundless statement, nothing more. They just want to earn more money and also make you kneel to them, thanking them for their graciousness in saving your life. Instead, Lord Roland not only brought the medicine, he also doesn't charge you any fees for it. Yes, you don't even have to pay a copper royal for it. These words immediately heated up the crowd, but when the first person drank the purified water, he quickly felt how his body changed. Unable to believe it, he tore open his clothes only to see how the dark spots quickly faded away. This medicine is indeed effective. I'm healed, I'm healed. Me too, God above, the wounds no longer bleed. God, you say, where is it? I only see a group of liars. That's right. This medicine has nothing to do with the church. Long live His Highness, Roland. As more and more people were healed, the witnessing crowd also became more and more excited. If the First Army hadn't been there to control the order, the water bags placed on the table would have immediately been washed away by the flood of fugitives. At the moment, His Highness is busy with developing the Western region. For this, he requires a lot of manpower to cultivate fields, build houses, build roads. He does not charge you anything for the medicine, and he also doesn't force you to go with us to the west. The soldier responsible for the propaganda continued to shout as loud as possible, but His Royal Highness promises that as long as you are willing to follow us to the western region and work for him, you will get food, shelter, and payment. No matter what your specialty is, you will get a matching job. If you are willing to take the first step into a new life, just step forward and follow the mercenaries on board, they will take you to your new home. If you are unwilling, that is also okay, we will still be here and provide help for the next 3 days, after that we will leave. During these 3 days, food will be given out free of charge by the caravan. Is there really a new home and work with salary waiting for us? Someone asked loudly. Of course, that is the condition offered by His Highness. The soldier nodded in response. Please let me on board, I am willing to serve His Royal Highness. Me too. And I'm a blacksmith. Brian was very pleased to see that within this group of hundreds of people, no one chose to stay in King City and instead they all decided to board the ship to the west. The moment a vessel was full, it would immediately depart and then be replaced by an empty ship. Under Margaret's command, there wasn't even the slightest pause between. Afterward, Brian continued to lead refugees from the camps to the dock, always relying on echo sound transmission technique to draw in a new batch of Eastern Region refugees. The number of refugees under her control would be between 300 to 400 every time. As he returned with a new team of patients to the pier, he suddenly saw how the First Army stationed in the wheat fields in the south began to move. A team of them rushed out at flying speed into the direction of the northern bank of the canal, while carrying their guns in their hand. What happened? Brian asked into the direction of Iron Axe's men. Scout Miss Lightning said that someone had secretly jumped off the ship and run away, one of them offered while saluting. Maybe there's a rat which had hidden itself between the refugees? Chapter 225 The Avengers. In fact, there was more than one of those rats, so once again, Iron Axe stood in front of a man they had captured and looked at him expressionlessly. You are the third person who's tried to escape by jumping off the ship. The refugees also told us that you haven't come from the Eastern region. So, what will be your important last words? Will it be a confession? The two people who had previously been caught, after using a dagger to cut off a finger, of both of them immediately confessed their origins and purpose in coming. Of course, their corpses were still thrown into the canal afterwards, since Iron Axe had never been a person who had a soft heart. His experience of struggling for survival in Iron Sand City was that when dealing with an enemy that was hiding the head and showing the tail, the best response was to cut off one exposed limb after the other. However, what surprised him was that the prisoner with his after being pushed down on his knees and getting his hands tied to his back, still looked very healthy, nothing like those other sick people. Is it possible that some other faction has sent him here to die? I'm not your enemy, were his first words when he opened his mouth, and directly stared into Iron Axe's eyes. My name is Hill Fox, Theo should know my name. At this time Theo still hadn't left the dock. After being called, he came over to Iron Axe, looked at Hill Fox, and said, "This man is one of the people who belong to Black Hammer." "So, he isn't your man?" Iron Axe confirmed. "He has nothing to do with me, he is a street rat who only recently joined." "You deceived Black Hammer and also the Skeleton Fingers." Hill suddenly opened his mouth and shouted, "You are not working for Timothy, but rather the Lord of the Western Territory, His Highness Roland Wimbledon." "He knows too much," Theo said as he made a slicing gesture across his neck to Iron Axe. "The best place for this man is the canal." Hill, to stop his death, proclaimed, "I have heard everything the mercenary announced, I believe we can cooperate. I am willing to work for His Royal Highness Roland." "His Highness does not need the allegiance of a street rat," Iron Axe said as he pulled out his sword. "I am not a street rat, I'm a citizen of King City. I'm Timothy's enemy," Hill cried. "Wait," Theo called Iron Axe to stop and went over to Hill. The latter raised his head and looked fearlessly into the guard's eyes, with eyes which seemed to burn. So, this was what I saw in his eyes at the first time, but wasn't able to understand at the time, Theo thought. His eyes were full of hatred, and the hatred was so intense that even as he was deliberately trying to conceal it, he could not completely cover his burning anger. "Tell me what it is you want to do for His Highness." "It is true that I lived in the northern district of the city and that I occasionally went to the Covert Trumpeter to get a drink, but I didn't lose all my possession because of gambling. Furthermore, my wife also didn't run away with someone else." Hill gnashed his teeth. "The truth is, it was Timothy who caused her death." The story really wasn't that complicated, which allowed Theo to quickly come to understand the sequence of the events. He and his wife originally were members of the Dove and Cylinder and acrobatic troupe, who often performed in King City's inner city. The acrobatic troupe wasn't that big, they only had 7 members, and the atmosphere between them has always been very harmonious. His wife was the only woman in the group, and had also been unanimously pursued by everyone. But in the end, Hill became the victor, finally winning her heart. Afterward, their married life was very sweet, and not much later the both of them had saved enough to buy a house in the inner city. But all this was destroyed by Timothy's witch-hunting operation. Under Langley's leadership, the patrol acted like a bunch of mad dogs, recklessly capturing those under suspicion, and his wife just happened to be one of those who had been unfortunate enough to be captured. Hill Fox had thought that as long as he paid the ransom money, he could get his wife released, or if that proved impossible at least see her face to face. However, even though the prison warden accepted the ransom, not only did he not release her, he even refused his request to let him enter the jail and see her. He only tried appeasing him by saying that he only had to wait a while until they confirmed that his wife wasn't a witch, and she would naturally be set free afterwards. So when the warden informed him that he should come to the jail to get his wife, he never expected that the situation would take a sharp turn for the worse, leaving him to find the scarred corpse of his wife. When Hill angrily went to Langley to demand an explanation, the final result was, the prison head and his guards had merely been sentenced to 10 lashes, and received a fine of 25 silver royals, while he was given 3 gold royals in compensation. This kind of sentencing was totally unacceptable for Hill. He even went so far as finding the highest person in charge, Sir Weimer, also known as Knight Steelheart, but even this was to no avail. Sir Weimer could only tell him that Langley was Timothy's cronies and that the new members of the patrol were also all his lackeys. Furthermore, the witch hunt was His Majesty's personal order, so even Sir Pale, the Minister of Justice, could not speak out against it. Thereupon Hill decided he would make the new king pay, never anticipating that his former partners in the acrobatic troupe would actually support him. However, as a group of acrobats without any form of combat expertise, wealth, or troops under their command, it was almost impossible for them to carry out their vendetta against the king. The only possible way to harm him that Hill could think of was collecting intelligence about Timothy and giving it to his enemies, like the Queen of Clearwater Garcia Wimbledon. For this, they had all joined different groups of street rats, and decided to collect any clues they could find concerning the new king. This was also the reason why he secretly monitored all of Theo's movements. In case that Timothy wanted to get rid of the refugees, he had to try to stop them as much as possible. But he was too slow before he could take action. The demonic plague had broken out, and Theo suspended the transportation of the refugees. But today, Hill discovered that they had started the operation once again. And in order to investigate, he straightforwardly disguises himself as a refugee and succeeded in mixing in with the crowd, resulting in the discovery that in truth Theo was actually serving Roland Wimbledon, the fourth prince of the Kingdom of Grey Castle, who, without a doubt, as a qualified competitor of the throne of Grey Castle, was also an enemy of Timothy. Probably in the eyes of Hill, as long as it allows him to kill the new king, he wouldn't even shrink away from working for the devil. Okay, the last question. By mixing into the crowd to make discreet inquiries for news, did it never occur to you that you might infect yourself? Theo asked with interest. I never thought that a person with vengeance as his aim would throw his life away that easily. I have the antidote, Hill confessed. It is hidden in a pocket in my undergarments. All my troops' partners spend most of their family's possessions to buy it for me from the black market. Theo reached out and searched with his hand, fishing out a finger-thick transparent vial, which was filled with a blue liquid. He handed it over to Iron Axe, then said, "That should be the holy elixir of the church. I think His Royal Highness will be interested in something like this." This person, Iron Axe, received the vial, then asked, "What do you plan with him?" Well, Theo touched his chin. If it were the normal times, without the possibility of verifying the authenticity of his words, we could only choose the safest method and directly send him on his way. However, at this time, there was someone in the camp who could judge whether he was speaking the truth or was lying. I want to ask Miss Nightingale to verify his words. Later in the evening, Theo returned to the covert trumpeter. Black Hammer's spirit evidently wasn't very high. With the spread of the recent epidemic, his business had dropped so low it was at freezing point. And if that wasn't bad enough already, Silver Ring and Potts had also become infected, which intensified his restlessness by many times. Hill, as if nothing unusual had happened, sat slightly stiff on the opposite side of Theo. Theo put on a slight smile, then threw out a pouch of gold royals in front of Black Hammer. There really is no reason for you to be so depressed. I have some good news, and I also have a business offer for you. After counting the coins and putting them away, Black Hammer opened his mouth and said weakly, "Currently we won't take any business. Now that the demonic plague is running amok, who would be foolish enough to go outside? All this money isn't even sufficient to buy the holy elixir. Don't you know how much you have to pay to buy even one bottle of medicine from the black market? At least 25 gold royals." What a coincidence, Theo laughed. As it happens, the business I am speaking of has also to do with buying medicine. He paused, a special medicine to cope with the demonic plague. Chapter 226 Inner City Operation. You managed to get hold of the holy elixir? Black Hammer was suddenly back in full spirit. Holy elixir? Theo retracted his smile and sneered instead. There is no need to take the church's drug. There are others medicines that can also cure patients of the demonic plague. Saying this, he removed 2 small bags from his waist and placed them on the table. Putting the blame on the witches is just the usually trick used to get some benefits. After all, a dead person cannot talk back. Puzzled, Black Hammer picked up one of the bags, and placed it near his ear and shook it. Only then did he untie the rope and smell what was inside. No odor? Just take them to Silver Ring and Potts. afterward you will know that this is the real medicine, Theo said. They should be somewhere in the tavern. Since we discovered their infection, I made them hide in the basement, and I didn't allow them to come out. Nowadays, whenever people see someone with black spots, it's quite likely that they will go out of their way to attack the sick, and because of this, the den of the skeleton fingers won't open its door to let them in. Black Hammer picked up the second bag and announced, "Sir, I'll go now and give it a try." When he got up and left, Hill was still staring at the table, not saying a word, which made Theo secretly shake his head. An ordinary person who lives under the constant threat of the demonic plague can never keep so calm when he hears that he can get the medicine to cure the disease. Even if you do not want to seem too excited, at least take a look at it and ask a few words. With his performance, Hill has proven that he doesn't hold the qualification to become a spy. Can this medicine really cure the demonic plague? Littlefinger shouted suddenly. Sir, where did you get this from? Even the little girl is better at it than him, Theo thought while taking a sip of his wine. Without a doubt, after all, it was given to me by my lord in the royal palace. Other than him, who else would dare to go against the church? In no time, Black Hammer came back and brought silver ring and pots along. Oh, my God, this medicine is incredible. Just moments after they drank it, the black spot on their bodies had already begun to disappear. Seeing Theo, both men immediately went to their knees even though their wounds were still bleeding, and in unison they said, "Sir, thanks a lot for your medicine, you've saved our lives." "First go and bandage your wounds," Theo waved at their injuries. Although the purified water was able to heal the disease, it still could not heal their wounds. Such serious injuries would have to recover like any other injury, and needed at least a week. Rather than thanking me, you should thank my employer. If you can fulfill this current mission, it is even possible that you can get rid of your identity as street rats. Maj. No, I mean, does your employer really want us to sell this medicine? Black Hammer asked excitedly. Apparently, he had already realized how much revenue they could make by selling these potions. That's right, the church is currently using the medicine to deceive the people, which has made my employer furious with them. If he allows this group of so-called fortune-tellers who lack any scruple keep going, I'm afraid the whole King's City will have changed into a cathedral soon, rather than Wimbledon's home territory. Theo lowered his voice. Also, he is unwilling to see such a huge city only be left with only a few citizens. Therefore, this medicine absolutely cannot be sold at a price so expensive that it would lead to it becoming unaffordable for most people. He took another 2 leather bags from his waist and threw them on the table. These kind of bags will be sold for at most for 10 silver royals. 10 silver royals? Black Hammer exclaimed, his eyes shot wide open. Yes, 6 belong to my employer, the rest will belong to you. He extended his palm, and this medicine should be enough to use 500 to 600 people. Therefore you can obtain at least several hundred royals. Even after splitting it up, it is still not a small amount. It should be sufficient for you to spend it for the rest of your life in comfort. The other side seemed as if they wanted to speak but were unable to find the words. The whole time they stared at the waterbacks on the table, seemingly thinking about how to obtain even greater benefits. Within his heart, Theo clearly knew what was going through these street rats' minds. The potion itself had no processing cost. Even if they gave it away for free, it wouldn't have been a problem. However, without a profit to be shared, he could only rely on himself, which would substantially lower the efficiency and would also be much more eye-catching. So, by letting the rats sell the medicine, he could reduce the risk, and 10 silver royals was also a price that the majority of the urban citizens would be able to pay. Of course, to be honest, he couldn't trust that they would sell it so cheaply. Whether they stole a part of it to sell in the inner city, or transferred it to the black market, they would always make huge profits. Ultimately, the amount of potion sold to the citizen for a low price would perhaps be less than half of it, but this wasn't the focus of Theo's concern. His task was to undermine the conspiracy of the church as much as possible so that everyone could understand that the holy elixir was not the only antidote able to dispel the evil spirits, nor was it such a rare or expensive thing. The result would be that the propaganda of the church would become publicity questioned, especially by those believers who had gone to great extents to buy such costly medicine, beginning to question themselves about whether God's spokesperson had cheated them or not. I know exactly what you're thinking. Theo opened his mouth and began to speak. You want to hide some of the medicine and secretly sell it for a higher prices by selling it to the upper ranks. I can act as if I haven't seen it, but I won't forget. His tone became cold. My employer really isn't a good-natured person. If you do not want to drown into the moat, it would be the best to show a bit of restraint. After all, only alive can you feel the pleasures of living. But what should we do if someone else resells the medicine? Silver Ring asked. That's very easy to be solved. Everyone can only buy one bag and they have to drink it on the spot. After he finished giving his advice, he looked at Black Hammer and asked, How is it? Are you interested in this business? But the covert trumpeter may not be able to handle so much medicine, I think. Theo interrupted him immediately. It's your business to arrange for the people who will sell the medicine, and it is also your decision where you will sell it. I'm just the substitute my employer has sent to keep an eye on you. Black Hammer gnashed his teeth, looked at his 4 subordinates, and when he saw that none of them were raising any objection, he smashed his fist on the table and proclaimed, This business, I will take it. Well, Theo nodded. On sunset, the day after tomorrow, a carriage carrying the medicine will come to the pub's entryway, so you have time until then to arrange your workforce and also spread the news about the drug release. Do a good job of it. My employer doesn't want to see any failure. The day after tomorrow is the last day of the First Army's stay. After they leave the city, no matter what the city turns into, it won't cause a threat for His Royal Highness, Theo thought. After leaving the tavern, it didn't take long until Hill had caught up to him. Won't you meet up with my companions? They are all eager to take revenge against Timothy. For the time being I'm trusting you because you passed the test. Theo shook his head and continued. If you had not been caught today, what would have been your next steps? I would have gone back and told everyone the news, and listened to their opinions about it. I'm not sure if I should continue to keep watch for a while or if I should immediately go to His Highness Roland, Fox replied. Oh? Theo's interest was piqued, so he asked, What's your opinion about it? For a moment Hill hesitated, then stated what was on his mind. I do not think that His Royal Highness is the same as most of the other nobles. Very few of them wouldn't spare any effort to save the fugitives, and he also treats the witches equally favorable as everyone else. Supposing the case that Timothy would be the same, it would be unlikely that my wife would have. He became silent for a while, so I would prefer to serve His Highness directly. If that is the case you should go back and say nothing, act as if you have never been to the pier. Why? Hill lifted his head in astonishment. An outstanding spy should make a habit of concealing their secrets inside of their heart, rather than sharing everything with others, especially at such a critical moment as this. Theo stated one reason after another. If you want to work for His Highness, there are still many things you will need to learn. Chapter 227 The Whistleblower. In the grand hall of the church, the presiding priest was overlooking the farmer kneeling before his feet. The farmer's originally tall and sturdy stature had now turned into a completely crooked lump, with his hands slightly trembling and his skin showing an abnormal purple color. Not much longer and those patches will condense into dark spots, and eventually spread all over his body. By only getting infected today he can be considered as strong enough. I remember you. You are Rocky Hill living in the Eastern District. You frequently come to the church to bring us fresh wheat grain, the priest said. You recognize me. That's great, Your Reverence, he cowed out again and again. The demonic plague infected my family. I need the holy elixir, I beseech you. However, what is it that you brought with you to the church today? The holy elixir isn't something that I can arbitrarily give away, Fairy stated, not stalling or taking his time. The exchange it requires has to be given by your heart. In order to buy medicine, I have been cheated by those rats and lost all my money, Rockhill said with a trembling voice. Please forgive me, for my heart wasn't sincere. I should have never sought shortcuts by going through the black market. At present I only have one last egg left, please accept it. With these words, he took one plump egg out of his chest and offered it with his hands extended above his head. Pinning your hope on the deceiving and mean people of the black market will naturally be punished, but God will always extend His hand to help a lost lamb back on the right track. Only those who recognize their own faults will be able to go further and further on their pilgrimage. Fairy took the egg and smiled. Get up, God forgives you. Really? Rocky Hill didn't dare believe his ears. God's envoys will never deceive someone. Fairy beckoned waved, and another follower holding a box with potions immediately came over. Fairy picked 4 bottles and handed them to Rocky Mountain. If I remember correctly, your family has a total of 4 people, right? Yes, Your Reverence. He swallowed his tears, took the holy elixir in his hands and then leaned over to kiss the priest's shoes. Thank you, thank you. From now on I will dedicate my whole life to the church and to God. This scene also touched all the believers standing at the side. They immediately began to cheering, happily welcoming a new member to their family of believers. Waiting until the cheers ebbed down a little, Fairy held his hand up indicating that they should become quiet, then said with a clear voice, "Next." This kind of holy elixir distribution continued until dusk. With the sounding of the King City's bell, Priest Fairy declared the end of the day's distribution ceremony, which would be continued tomorrow morning, leaving the begging crowd behind in the main hall. Although his body had become somewhat tired, his spirit was still fully burning. Since standing in the grand hall listening to the pleas and prayers of the people, and watching as they couldn't wait to do everything they could to please him, made it impossible to not feel like a god in his mind. No, what is commonly known as God is really just the church itself, Fairy thought. After developing the demonic disease and the corresponding antidote, we can easily decide about other people's life and death. With this kind of power in our hands, what is the difference between us and God? Sighing with emotion, he was once more assured that giving up the inheritance of his family business and joining the church had been the right choice. In the face of such power, no one will be able to stop up. Wealthy businessmen? High-ranking nobles? When facing death, they will all be equally willing to abandon everything in exchange for the opportunity to live. Returning to the rest area in the back hall, a clergyman hurriedly came up to him and whispered in his ear, "Your Reverence." A street rat came in and reported that he had discovered an important matter. Regarding what? Something about the refugees of the eastern region, the concrete news he only wants to say when meeting you face to face. The clergyman immediately answered. According to the church's instructions given beforehand, Fairy should make full use of the demonic plague and its antidote, and gather as many new followers for Hermes as possible. Therefore, winning over the refugees was also a part of his plan, but compared to the citizens of King City their importance wasn't as high. He had intended to wait another 2 or 3 days, and let half of the homeless refugees die before coming out to treat and cure the rest, which would make them feel as if their king had abandoned them. As a result, within the whole of King City, 90% of its population would become the church's followers. With this kind of merit and the previous order for the battle for the throne, would perhaps be sufficient to take another step down the road to the rank of bishop. At least in regards to rewarding the people for their merits, the church has always been very fair, never considering someone's blood relationship or former identity. As long as someone showed outstanding performance, they would be promoted. What kind of severe problem could have arisen within the refugees? Suppressing his doubts to the bottom of his heart, he quietly said, "All right, just take him to the secret room, I will join him soon." "Yes, Your Reverence." Taking off the ceremony priest robe, Fairy grasped a flexible plate armor out of the closet and put it on, and then covered it over with a loose coat. Afterward, he stepped in front of a silver mirror for a little reorganization before he left for the secret room. Stepping into the chamber and analyzing the situation, the priest saw that the informant's hair was disorderly, and his complexion was sallow and skinny, allowing him to see his bones and his arms. However, what was strange was that on his whole body there was not a trace of the black spots or any other symptoms. The moment the opposite party saw the priest enter, he immediately went on his knees and announced, "Your Reverence, my name is Needle, and I have important information to tell you. You may speak." But, he looked up, drifted with his eyes to the other 2 people accompanying them in the secret room, indicating that he was hesitant to speak in front of outsiders. "They don't matter, they are Priest Shotrath, my right hand," Fairy said. "And the other one is Grandma Hera, who is responsible for safeguarding and taking care of this secret room, almost never leaving this place." Then I will speak but regarding the promised. The holy elixir is here, Fairy said, impatiently pulling out the blue vial. As long as your information is valuable, I will, of course, heal you from the evil spirits. Your Reverence, I assure you that this information is absolutely astonishing, Needle proclaimed and raised his head. Some people are continuously transporting the fugitives away, and they have empty ships everywhere on the canal. All this I have personally seen with my own eyes. I fear that within a few days they will be able to bring away all the refugees. They are taking away those patients infected with the black spots? Fairy frowned. Are you sure you haven't misread the situation? Previously he had already received the message that a fleet was transporting the refugees of the eastern region away, but something like this was quite normal. Those nobles always love it when the territory of another noble is stricken by natural disaster. This time it will allow them to plunder some workers for a very low price. Anyway, now that the demonic disease is running amok, those idiots will naturally be punished by God. However, now, after they know that the plague has infected the people, how can they still shelter the refugees? No, they are in possession of a cure for the demonic disease. After those mercenaries gave the patients a bag with some strange water to drink, the dark spots on their body quickly disappeared. Furthermore, they also claimed that they are coming from the western region, and as long as the refugees are willing to come along with the fleet, they would receive food, shelter, and remuneration for the work they have done. Needle's eyes paused on Fairy's, but the most astonishingly is that these people are working together with a witch. What did you just say? What I said is absolutely correct, Your Reverence. Needle shouted. I mixed in with the ranks of the fugitives and embarked on a ship. In the beginning, I hadn't seen anything, but then somebody jumped from the ship, and the mercenaries on shore began to pursue him. Before long I noticed that there was a shadow circling in the sky, but it wasn't a bird, it was a witch flying in the air. I was so scared that I did not dare to move. I waited until the ship had sailed several kilometers and I couldn't detect a trace of the witch, before I took the next opportunity and dived into the water to escape. I almost needed a day to come back. Needle rubbed his hands. Your Reverence, do you believe now that this information is worth a bottle of holy elixir in exchange? Wait a minute, you said that they have a way to cure the demonic plague and that you also have drunk it. In other words, does that mean you were previously sick? Fairy asked. That's right, but didn't you say, as long as I have valuable information to offer, I can? Needle grinned awkwardly, revealing a mouth of uneven yellow teeth. So that's the reason, he doesn't want to use it but instead wants to take this bottle of holy elixir to the black market to sell it. After pondering for a moment, Fairy asked again, how many people does the other side have? Are you sure they were mercenaries from a caravan? They assuredly were. They have no armor, no horses, and their weapons were a kind of wooden spear. As for their numbers, Needle went with his hand through his hair, not more than 100 people, at most. To whom did belong the ships? This? I cannot tell, most of the ships haven't hung any flag, and even in case they had hung one up, I wouldn't be able to recognize them. But the mercenaries personally said that the fleet was leaving for the western region. Yes, he also mentioned that the recruitment was for the Lord of Border Town. Needle racked his brain to recall his words. He was currently in the process of reclaiming the land, and thus the Lord needs a large workforce. That's all I can remember. Well, this was indeed a crucial news you had to offer. The priest took a deep breath and pulled a bottle of blue liquid from his pocket and threw it towards Needle. Take it with you, it is yours. Thank you, Your Reverence. Flustered, the latter caught the bottle, but suddenly his whole body began to tremble, and his eyes became huge. Only seeing a slender dagger sticking out of his neck, sending out a faint coldness, with the old and senile room manager suddenly standing behind him. Chapter 228 Faceless Person. The granny retrieved her dagger, and let him fall to the ground. She then picked up the medicine bottle, rubbed it on her body to clean it and handed it back to the priest. Well done, Fairy nodded, now drag him out and dispose his corpse. Yes, she answered with a husky voice, dragging the corpse without any effort, much unlike an old woman. Your Reverence, do you believe that he was telling the truth? After the manager had left, Priest Shotrath asked, that the caravan and the witches are working together, and if I remember correctly, wasn't it the fourth prince, Roland Wimbledon, who got assigned to Border Town? Whether it is true or not we will only know after we send someone to examine it, Fairy said with a serious expression. But I think the possibility that he lied to us isn't likely. As long as we send some eyes on top of the city walls to take a look, we should be able to notice the situation of the refugees. So if he wanted to fabricate a lie in exchange for the holy elixir, at least he would have taken one which would have been harder to verify. I'll send someone to review the situation right away, the priest bowed. Go ahead and investigate the information, promptly come back afterwards and report to me. Fairy slowly walked to the table, sat down, and started playing with the elixir in his hands. These refugees had already been in the bag. After all, to control their movements and prevent them from fleeing from the demonic plague by themselves, he had dispatched the street rats from the Dreamland organization, and made them mix in with the refugees. There they should spread the news that the church would soon come to save them. As long as they could endure for a few more days, not only would they receive God's redemption, there was also the possibility that they would be accepted by the church, and become a citizen of King City. As for those rats, they were mostly already infected themselves, and because of this, they wouldn't spare any effort to exchange for the holy elixir. In case the information given by the rat was correct, it meant that this group of people had at least started transport the refugees away since yesterday. Moreover, according to their posture, it doesn't like they would abandon the transportation, which was equivalent to severely hindering his own plans. Even more grave, it appeared that they were working together with a witch, since Fairy was convinced that only a witch would be capable of curing the demonic plague. Your Reverence, the body has been taken care of. The old woman walked back into the secret room and cautiously closed the door without making any noise. Also, have some fallen really shown themselves? Most likely, Fairy lowered his voice, and there are maybe more than one. For a moment he paused. Furthermore, since no stranger is here, there is no need for you to pretend to be ugly. There is no stranger here. Seeing you like this is detestable. Yes. She bent down into a crab stance, followed by her whole body began to issue a crackling and rattling sound as if all the bones in her body began to rub in general. Followed by a rapid growth of her stature, in the blink of an eye her gray hair turned black, and her skin that was full of wrinkles and loose gradually began to tightening again. Becoming stretched taut but flexible once again, as if her body's time had flowed backward. When she finally straightened her body, she had turned into a beautiful and enchanting woman. That's much better, Fairy smiled with satisfaction. If I remember correctly, this fellow had been hanged at the gate, right? Yes, my lord, she nodded. Of the four she is the one you spent the most time with. You really know how to please me. The priest smacked his lips, but I expect that Shotrath will be back soon. There isn't enough time. He suppressed his desire. Furthermore, you still have to deal with the fallen ones. Give them to me, my lord, she vowed while bowing. I won't let any of the fallen go. A quarter of an hour later, Shotrath returned to the secret room. He first looked at the witch, and then turned to the fairy to report, Your Reverence, outside of the western city many shadow are indeed missing. But within the dark I was unable to see it clearly, so I sent some subordinates carrying torches out to circle the area, only to discover that many tents were absolutely empty. However, there was no trace of flames to see from the dock area, so I cannot tell if the caravan is still stationed there. As for the witch, no need to investigate, Fairy interrupted him, since the other side dares to transport the fugitives away, the intelligence provided by the rat shouldn't be wrong. This way, we know that their group has at least 2 witches with them, one that can fly and one who can eliminate the epidemic. Especially the latter is a great threat to my plan, so we certainly must stop them. For now, they are still only treating the people outside the city, but if that witch were to come into the city and openly treat those who are infected, our own propaganda, claiming the holy elixir as their only solution, will have become a joke. What should we do? The other priest asked. Should we send out the army of judges to arrest the witch? Fairy shook his head. This is King City and not the holy city at Hermes. The church has only around 20 judges stationed here, but if we sent them out, who will keep the order tomorrow during the medicine distribution ceremony? Furthermore, their number is just too small. besides punishing them as a warning to others, what would we really achieve? Even if they were able to defeat those mercenaries, the witches would most likely have already escaped. Since we are in King City, the army of judges which is responsible for maintaining order is merely at the size of dozen of people. Otherwise, if it was at the scale of several hundreds of people, I am afraid the king couldn't sleep at night unless he subjugated us. Then, should we inform the holy city, and ask the bishop to send reinforcements? By the time the judges will have arrived, I am afraid the fugitives will already be long gone. Fairy sneered. Furthermore, for a group of mercenaries we won't need the elite army of the church to deal with them, we will just give this matter to Dreamland to deal with. To the rats? Shotrath got started. At least they are numerous, allowing them to surround the dock in advance and then attack in a swarm all at once. What do you think, without wearing an armor and only being armed with wooden spears, how many rats can they handle? He asked. About 2 or 3 people. Therefore they will only be able to deal with around 200 people at maximum, while Dreamland can easily gather a mob of around 1,000 people or more. Of course, these brave and aggressive dregs will never be able to attack in formation like the army of judges, but for just killing the group of mercenaries, they should be more than sufficient. Fairy stood up, informed Fierce Teeth Tanis that he has one day to gather his forces, the more, the better. Tomorrow night we will attack. Don't tell him that there are other ways to cure the disease, and also do not say that they will have to deal with witches, just tell him to make sure that no one escapes. His payment will be a box of the holy elixir. If he wants to shirk away or he senses a lie, tell him, in case he doesn't help. He won't any longer get the poppy or sleep fern from me. But the witches, what should we do against them? Especially the one who can fly in the sky. She won't be flying all the time, and the rats won't be able to end the fight in a short time. With other words, their only role is to attract the attention of the other side, Fairy said, while walking to the witch, stretching out his hand to gently caress her face. As long as Faceless sees an opportunity, she will sneak into their camp, completely beyond their notice. She only has to touch them once, and she will be able to completely disguise herself or someone else as the previously contacted person. But it is not only their appearance, but it is also even their stature and voice that she can perfectly imitate. And since the God Stone of Retaliation cannot remove her ability, she will become an excellent assassin. It was for this reason that she became one of the few remaining and specially trained witches of the church. When the other party realizes that there is no way left for them to win, the camp is bound to turn into chaos, and at that time, Faceless will make sure that no witch will be able to survive. The priest began to laugh. Chapter 229 On the eve of the day of return. On the third day, outside of King City's eastern city gate, Nightingale was hiding in her world of fog, calmly watching the group of shabbily clothed refugees. Under echo sound manipulating ability, one wave of refugees after another gathered together and slowly moved with Sir Brian towards the pier. Nowadays they no longer acted like they had 2 days ago, where they had to push their way through the refugees to reach the edge of the camp, always only breaking away small chunks at a time. After a significant number of refugees had been brought over, the rest of them had also noticed the movement, so as long as a wave of people was pulled away from the edge, the rest would continue to come over. By now, even the guards on King City's city wall had noticed what happened at their foot, but from their point of view, they only wished that these stinking refugees would hurry and finally go away from here. The whole project was currently progressing very smoothly. The number of refugees in the Eastern District was already running low, while the people at the North Gate had taken the initiative to move closer to their side. Perhaps by sundown, they could already smoothly sail away with everyone. At this time everyone seemed to be busy, only Nightingale seemed to be leisurely. Compared to Echo, surrounded by a layer of mercenaries, who was responsible for drawing in the refugees, and Lily, who was under the heavy protection of the First Army and constantly producing new purifying water, her own guards' work seemed to be redundant. Only when the mercenaries had to carry patients who were too ill to move by themselves, was there a need for her to be vigilant. Just then, Nightingale noticed Echo raising her head to look at the magnificent East Gate and softly sigh. "What happened?" Nightingale asked after going over. It's nothing, I'm just somewhat down. Echo expression turned rather sad. Before I had been sold to King City, I had to suffer the whole way along the road. Until now, I had always thought the reason that they were so cold to me was because of my identity as a sand person, which was something foreign to the people of Grey Castle. But now it appears that they are equally ruthless to their own people, which shows me that there is not much difference between them and the people of Iron Sand City. Recalling that Echo had been bought and sold as a slave, Nightingale didn't know how to answer her. In the end, she patted her on the shoulder and said comfortingly, "But not everyone is like them. There are also many people with good intentions, such as your sisters of the Witch Cooperation Association and also His Highness." "Do you want to say that His Highness can actually end the disputes?" Echo whispered, "Regardless if they live in the huge kingdoms, the Sand Nation, the Fjord, or are just ordinary people and the witches, do you believe that they can all live together freely and in peace, without needing to fight each other?" "In case it is done by His Highness, I think it will be possible," Nightingale replied in a cheerful tone, "and it isn't those strange machines or the amazing guns that give me the feeling. No, he himself is. I always feel as if His Royal Highness and we are not the same type of person. Of course he is not like us. He is the Prince of the Kingdom of Grey Castle. No, this feeling has nothing to do with his identity or his status." She shook her head. "I'm unable to say from where exactly this kind of feeling is coming from. It is merely my intuition, nothing more. Maybe people like His Royal Highness, who can come up with so many strange and eccentric theories, even wanting to repeatedly study all of us witches' abilities until he understands them thoroughly, just have a different train of thoughts than the other people. Anyway, if he was to achieve such an amazing thing, I don't feel that it would be that strange." "You really have confidence in him," Echo laughed out, immediately reducing the sad expression on her face. "I hope that one day, I will be able to go back to the south and meet with my people." Confidence? Regarding some aspects, yes, but regarding some others, she wasn't so sure. Nightingale could not help but look towards the west, and ask herself what he was doing, now that she wasn't at his side. Was he busy drawing those strange machines, or was he together with Anna? She forcefully shook her head, trying to disperse such thoughts. "Anyway, at the end of this day, we will depart back to Border Town," Nightingale thought, "and when we get back, I can ask him anything I want, and he won't be able to lie to me." At noon, when they returned to the camp to rest, Lightning also slowly came down to land. During these days, Lightning had the hardest task of all of them. She had to constantly fly patrol under the scorching sun high up in the sky. Especially for concealing her body, Lightning had to wear a special coat with sky camouflage, which tightly wrapped itself around her body, and even covered her head. This clothes with their strange name were apparently not designed as beautiful clothes by His Highness. Its surface was coated with a mixed pattern of gray and blue, allowing her to almost integrate with the background as she flew. As long as someone didn't directly look at her, it would be hard to detect her. After landing, the first thing the little girl did was to take off the coat, then grab a water pouch to quell her thirst. Nightingale discovered that her clothes were wet from the sweat inside and that her forehead and nose were also covered with sweat, while her windproof glasses had left marks on her white cheeks. "It had been hard on you," Nightingale said and crouched down in front of her, beginning to wipe the sweat away. "Fortunately, these people aren't endlessly rushing over from the east," Lightning stuck out her tongue, "or else I would really have passed out from this sun." "Will you be able to go home tomorrow?" Lily went dispirited and downcast to Lightning's side. "I haven't taken a shower for several days. By now, I feel uncomfortable from head to foot." Nightingale could not help but laugh aloud. Obviously, during their time in the Witch Cooperation Association, there had been times where they hadn't bathed for half a month, and no one had complained about it back then, but now they did it already after a little more than a week. She suddenly had the thought that the development of the bathroom and soap was in truth His Royal Highness' conspiracy, and after they had all become attached to those strange and useful things of his, it had become difficult for the witches to make a firm resolution to ever leave Border Town. However, the calm did not last until the end of the shipment project. After lunch, His Highness man who was responsible for gathering news in King City, Theo, brought back some bad news. "You mean that Dreamland is gathering their forces, with the intention of surrounding the pier?" Iron Axe asked with a frown. Yes, they might be preparing to encircle the pier. Theo corrected him, the first part was determined to be true, while the latter part instead seems a bit bizarre, so my informants are not sure about it. At present, all other Blackstreet organizations have already begun to act. They are preparing themselves in case Dreamland unexpectedly attacks them. However, compared to encircling the pier, this news can just be seen as deliberately sending out some smoke. I believe that this news was leaked by themselves midway, which could be seen as quite common thing for the rats to do. After all, most members of the Blackstreet organization are nothing more than bullies or dregs, making it fundamentally impossible for them to be a tightly knit group. If my intelligence is correct, then Dreamland must be subjected to another force's command, otherwise wanting to depart from their own territory would be a very challenging affair for them. They are just a gang of scoundrels. It seemed Iron Axe wasn't the least concerned. If these people scatter in all direction, will it affect your plan of selling the medicine? It shouldn't, Theo said. They are unable to get their hands on the patrol, so it is unlikely that they can hinder me from entering and leaving through the side door. As for after we entered the city, the skeleton fingers will provide a force to protect the transport of the medicine. The only thing I'm worried about is you, because tonight I will have to stay in the city and supervising the sale of the purified water, so I'm afraid that it is impossible for me to see you off tomorrow morning. It won't matter, Iron Axe patted his arm reassuringly. In the future, His Highness will come in person to King City. We will see you again then. Just like Nightingale had predicted with the arrival of dusk, the last ship carrying refugees set sail into the direction of Silver City. And the rest of the more than 300 who weren't willing to leave King City were ordered to disperse by Iron Axe. Then they all evacuated to the other side of the canal, waiting for the curtain of night to descend. Chapter 230 Assassination, Part 1. Before the sun had completely gone down, Faceless quietly swam through the canal, circling the mercenary camp and nearing it from behind. Her real name was not really Faceless, but rather Afra, a name she liked very much, because it meant dust and had been given to her in the new holy city by Archbishop Heater. She loved this name, because dust was plain and not flowery. As long as it fell on the ground, one piece wasn't distinguishable from another, just like she wasn't generally. Only in front of Heather would Afra restore her real appearance. As a member of the arbitration tribunal, she assisted the Archbishop with handling a lot of those fallen, which includes their own witches who had attempted to revolt against the church, as well as those corrupted secular believers. The reason she had been sent to King City was to accomplish an essential mission: transform a devout presiding judge into the King of Grey Castle. As for capturing those fallen witches, it was just a part-time exercise. Furthermore, she also liked to imitate those witches who were sentenced to get tortured, then experience it herself, from start to finish, sharing the pain of the fallen, and experience even more deeply what she had accomplished. In this way she could atone for her own devil's power. The camp of the other side was erected very cleverly. It was directly by the shore at an elevation surrounded by open land, making it difficult to observe their whereabouts from a lower level, and the witch in the sky prevented her from coming any closer. Afra had to lurk in a farm warehouse, and wait until nightfall before she could take action. When the night enveloped the earth, she surprisingly discovered that the situation has changed. All of the mercenaries had withdrawn from the pier area, and completely fallen back inside the camp. Those foolish Dreamland rats had went so far as to hold some torches up, while gathering together in one place. It looked as if they wanted to tell the other side someone is coming to attack the camp. Even if there wasn't a flying witch, as long as the mercenary group wasn't blind, they could make out with one glance when the other side would be coming. What bad luck! Her heart became gloomy. If the enemy judged that the number of rats were too many, there wouldn't be any chance of winning, so they would certainly just retreat to the east. Although it was a taboo to march during the night, if it meant that they could save their life by escaping and splitting up, this taboo wouldn't matter so much anymore. While the men that belonged to Dreamland who should have already encircled the camp, were still at the other side of the pier, and were relying on a few wooden rafts to slowly cross the river. When they had finally set foot on the other side, Afra was afraid that the other party would have already run away long ago. Making the rats to chase the enemy during the night would be impossible. but how was she now supposed to find those damned witches? Afra hurriedly rushed toward the camp, hoping to merge in with their ranks before they began their retreat. But after rushing over, she saw an entirely unexpected scene. She discovered that the mercenaries had all assembled themselves nearby. There were still people patrolling around the camp, and the bonfire burned high, which allowed her to see their silhouettes come and go, showing an orderly picture and not the scene of chaos she had expected. Did they not choose to retreat? After a while of careful observation, Afra confirmed her judgment. At the same time a delighted feeling began to spread through her body. Although she didn't know for what reason the other side to decide to stay rather than escape as quickly as they could, but with this decision their ending had become predestined. She drew a dagger from her waist, observed the sentries' actions, and aimed for their weakest position. Apart from giving her the essential skills to survive in the outside world, Archbishop Heater had also taught her how to fight and kill. While her opponents were not battle-hardened elite mercenaries, which she could see from the arrangements of the sentinels. Taking advantage of the moment the mercenary turned to survey another area, she came in from a low and blind angle and quickly threw herself at him, one hand covering his mouth from behind, and the other masterfully stabbing a knife into his neck. After quietly killing the mercenary, keeping one hand on top of her enemy, she placed the other hand on her own chest, casting her deformation ability. This could be a long or it could be a short process. When she had replaced the king through a substitute, to ensure a long-term effect she had exhausted almost all of the magic in her body and the conversion time had lasted nearly half an hour. But this time, there was no need to try so hard. Within the blink of an eye she had turned into the mercenary. Even though the effect would only last for half a day, it would be more than enough time for the assassination. Before the other patrol had returned, with lightning speed, she pulled down the other's clothes and put them on herself. Afterward, she dragged his body into the wheat fields. However, when faced with the mercenary's weapon, she became a little confused. The weapon in her hands looked like an iron barrel with a wooden handle that did not have a lance at its tip but rather a swarthy hole. What is this weapon? Even after thinking about it for a long time, she was still unable to find the answer, but seeing that the other patrol member was returning, without a better choice Afra recalled the mercenary's previous appearance and carried it on her shoulder, assuming the appearance as if she was earnestly doing her sentry duty. Like on so many previous assassinations, when the other guard passed her, he didn't discover anything strange about her. Afra wasn't in a hurry to enter the camp to search for the witch's whereabouts. After all, her replacing technique could only imitate the external form, but didn't allow her to read their memories. So, in case she met one of his acquaintances she would easily be exposed. Thus she decided to wait until these troops were in a state of disorder, which would provide her with the liberty of choosing between countless opportunities. When the moon was hanging high up in the night sky, the Dreamland fools had finally crossed the canal, and were moving closer to the camp. The moment she heard the call of another sentry and saw the patrols and mercenaries withdrawing to the camp, she knew that her chance had come. Following the crowd into the camp, Afra was surprised to find out that the other side had far more than only 100 people. Forming a big circle, they were surrounded by the entire top of the small slope and were either crouching or standing, holding the strange pole in their hands, and always pointing the whole towards the enemy. But she had not the time to take a further look. Taking advantage of the group's attention being focused elsewhere, she bent over and entered the nearest tent. Soon, battle cries drifted over from the outside, cut off by a burst of the fierce explosion, frightening Afra into a little jump with its intense and almost unceasingly noise. What the hell was going on? On impulse, she wanted to take a look, but then she regained her control back and calmly waited. After some time, the camp became busy again, and she heard a lot of footsteps and shouted commands, which probably their attempts to adjust their defense in accordance to the enemy's attack. But slowly Afra became anxious. What took them so long? Why hadn't they attacked the top of the slope yet? A while later again, the sounds of explosion gradually thinned out, and when Afra was no longer able to hear the rats fighting, her heart sunk. Is it possible that the Dreamland wastrels were defeated? Even if the number of mercenaries has been doubled, they were still only 200 to 300 people, surrounded by more than 1,000 rats. With this numbers and by attacking from all sides, were they still unable to set foot at the top of the hill? It seems as if the opportunity was slipping out of her hands. Making a quick decision, Afra left the tent, trying to reach the center of the camp. There she would wait for the end of the battle. After all, during the roll call it would be nearly impossible for her to hide from all of their eyes. This really wasn't how she had planned the infiltration. She was neither familiar with the mercenaries' staff nor did she know their password, so she had to act quickly. Bypassing 2 tents, Afra slowly poked around the edge, looking at the center of the camp. There she saw 4 women sitting around a bonfire. They were most probably the witches their intelligence had spoken off. Although the number wasn't right again, from the beginning of this operation, the damned report hadn't been accurate. Furthermore, for her it didn't make a difference if she had to kill 2 or 4 witches. Anyone who was suspected to be corrupted needed to be tortured. And in case the time was too short for torturing, they at least all had to be killed. Even if they weren't really corrupted, sacrifices were always necessary. After she carefully observed her surrounding and decided upon a safe escape route, Afra stood up from behind the tent, pretending as if nothing had happened, as if she was just moving closer to the fire. Just when she had reached the middle of the open space, Afra felt a cold hard object press against her back. "Don't move," a woman's voice sounded. "Who are you?" Chapter 231 Assassination, Part 2. A chill spread over Faceless' body. How was this possible? She swallowed the saliva, then lowered her voice. "What kind of joke is this?" "I'm Vorte. It shouldn't be possible that they are lucky enough to know each other. There are so many mercenaries within the camp." "Don't tell me that she can remember every one of their names. How can that be?" She never expected to receive the sarcastic answer she got in response. "Is that so? I never knew men could also gather magic in their bodies. So, either you are a witch that had planned to infiltrate the camp, or you are an extremely unlikely wizard. No matter what the truth is, it is impossible that your name is Vorte as you have claimed. Within the soldiers of the First Army, there is definitely no one with such a different body type. Can this person see the devil's power?" Afra's heart finally sank to the depths. She now knew how she had been found out. There were more than 4 witches in the camp, and the woman behind her must be a witch as well. Moreover, she had an ability that was similar to the Eye of Truth. The Church's scriptures about magic had records of such an ability, which had several hundred of derivations, and all of them were not in conflict with the witch's ability. Since I haven't seen someone within my surroundings or getting close, does it mean that the other side's prime ability is hide her body? Now, kneel down, and put your hands behind your back. Maybe I can spare your life then, the woman shouted with a clear voice. "Do as I say." The mercenaries in the surrounding were still occupied with fighting, so they didn't notice the scene playing out at the central area, but that wasn't the case for the 4 witches near the fire though. They became aware of the abnormal situation as they cast their eyes over and asked, "What's the matter, Nightingale? Did something happen?" This was her last chance. Afra knew that her own strength was assassination and not related to an open battle, especially in the case where she wasn't wearing a god's punishment stones, which would have suppressed most witches' fantastic abilities. In case the witch who can fly is able to run away, it won't do any harm. However, the witch who can cure the demonic plague definitely has to die here. Otherwise, she will pose a serious threat to the Church's future plans. Of course, there was also the possibility that after killing the other side, she herself wouldn't be able to escape. Thinking of this possibility, she couldn't help herself from getting a tight feeling in her chest, but she soon calmed down again. Recalling that in order for the Church's goal to unify the 4 kingdoms, no effort should be spared to resist the devils from hell. And there were already many good soldiers who had sacrificed themselves for the greater good, and it would be a proud moment for her to join them. Furthermore, she believed that Heather would not forget her. Heather would make sure that her name would also be recorded in the sacred scriptures. "You mustn't come over," shouted the witch called Nightingale. "There is." At this split second, she suddenly raised her elbow to beat against her enemy's arm, simultaneously bowing her head to avoid being stabbed with her weapon. When you are talking, it is impossible to always pay attention. Thus there is the saying of holding one's breath in concentration, was what her drillmaster repeatedly taught her. Instead, regardless whether you are attacking or are trying to escape, the optimum moment to act is when the other side starts talking. Within her sleeve she had concealed a mechanism that activated at the first moment of contact. Spraying a white alchemic powder to the rear, which on contact with water would release a lot of heat. In case the enemy got any of it inside their mouth or eyes, they would immediately lose their fighting strength. Even if they were lucky enough not to breathe any of the fine powder in, they would at least be flustered for a while. Afterward, Aphra immediately pounced towards the 4 witches at the fire. The witch with golden hair quickly flew up, while the one witch who seemed to be the oldest disregarded her own safety and stepped in front of the other 2. Drawing out her sharp dagger, Aphra immediately stabbed directly toward the first witch. Since they couldn't escape anyway, and all 3 of them would die under her hand, it wasn't necessary to differentiate them according to priority. Just at the moment when her dagger pierced the other side's body, Aphra saw an incredible scene. A white shadow appeared in front of her at a place which was definitely still empty a second ago, with 2 blazing eyes glaring at her from under its hood. Is this Nightingale who stood behind me? At the eruption of the fine powder she was at close range, so why doesn't she seem to have been affected? Almost disbelieving her eyes, Faceless saw the other side lift her arm and a flame burst out from the silver weapon. And then her body was firmly pushed backward, resulting in her losing her balance, sending her backward to the ground, looking upwards. That's not good, there are still 2 important people I need to dispose of. Aphra wanted to stand up, wanted to draw her dagger and stab at the next witch, but right now, even raising her hand had already become tough, and her consciousness had already began to blur. What a pity, was the last thought flashing through her mind. After letting off the shot, Nightingale remained at the same place, watching the soldier who had been hit in the chest fall down. Then the body began to twist and shrink, slowly turning back into the appearance of an unknown woman. This had been her first time killing another witch. It was not until Lily anxiously called out to her that Nightingale came back to herself. Suppressing the surging emotion within her heart, she put away the gun, ran back to Wendy's side. "Where is the injury?" "It's nothing, I just feel a little pain." Wendy waved his hand, indicating that they should not panic. She shouldn't have been able to pierce through. "Does that mean the protective suit worked?" "I suppose it has." Undoing the bottoms on her chest, she saw the slender dagger hanging on the side of her clothes. The moment the jacket was opened, the knife fell out of the hole and landed on the ground, with no blood held on its tip. Of the protective clothing, only the outer layer had a small hole in it, while the soft inner layer still remained intact. "Why, you really scared me," Lily said, releasing a long breath, and then fell with buttocks on the ground. "Next time don't rush to me to help me resist the sword. I don't need you to do this for me." "Well," Wendy gently stroked her head, "am I not all right?" Lily pulled her head free and buried it in Wendy's bosom, releasing a muffled cry. "I was also scared," merely attending to obstruct her by stepping ahead, totally forgetting to use my power. Wendy shook her head. "If I had sent a strong gust of wind against her, she wouldn't have been able to thrust towards me." "It's because you are rarely fighting with others, so a reaction like that is quite normal," Nightingale comforted. "Fortunately you were wearing the protective clothing," Echo said, still showing a scared look. "Otherwise, this time would have been much more dangerous than it was." Before their departure, His Royal Highness had given each of them a special vest. Furthermore, he had demanded that they must never take this piece of clothing off at any time. Even though it seemed a little thick, it was still very light to wear. Seemingly made out of many layers, His Highness had explained that each layer had been coated by Soraya, giving it a high degree of flexibility, but also making it hard to pierce through with sharp objects. It offered excellent protection against swords, bows, and crossbows. If it hadn't helped her to resist the thrust, Wendy would most probably never have survived long enough to reach Nana. Lightning slowly landed next to the dead witch and asked, "Why did she attack us? Aren't we the same?" Nightingale stared at the lifeless woman, unable to speak for a long time. With the witch's eyes closed, the long blue hair scattered on the ground and her peaceful expression, the other doesn't seem to have experienced much pain. But she still couldn't forget that when she had stabbed at Wendy, she hadn't shown any trace of hesitation in her eyes, only the determination that what she was doing was inevitable and righteous. As if she was not killing a person, but rather fulfilling her life's philosophy. Perhaps in her heart, this had been the right behavior. No, Nightingale softly sighed. She wasn't one of us, she was just a lamentable person. Chapter 232 Shadow Islands. The fjord possessed countless islands. Until now, no one had ever passed beyond the border of all these islands. A man with a tall stature and a rough and vigorous appearance told them, "The further east you sail, the more unpredictable the climate will become, and the same also applies to the islands. I really do not know what degree of strangeness they eventually reach." "Even you have never reached the end of the islands?" Tilly asked curiously. "They say you are the most outstanding explorer of the fjord. Apart from you, there are only a few who dare cross the searing Flame Island and continue sailing eastwards." Ha ha ha, the man began to laugh heartily. "Your praise is too much. In fact, every year there are brave people of the fjord who sail eastwards in search for new land, but it's hard for them to find anything new. With the raging hurricanes and the suddenly appearing fog, it eventually becomes impossible for the ships to move even a single step further." "He is Thunder," Ashes remembered, "the first explorer to discover the Shadow Islands. But 2 years ago, within the perils of the sea, his whereabouts suddenly became unknown, and by now many people think that he has already died." She had never thought that he would be on Sleeping Island, and even less that the fifth princess would come to him with an agreement that he would help to open up new sea routes for Sleeping Island, draw a sea map and search for new ruins, while Tilly would send witches to support his explorations. As for the reason for his disappearance during the last 2 years, she had never heard him mentioning it, and Tilly had also never spoken about it. But she had the feeling that Her Majesty knew the inside story. Otherwise, they would never have reached such a mutual understanding. This point caused Ashes to feel slightly unhappy within her heart. "Just like yesterday's hurricane?" "That's right. They appear within the blink of an eye and disappear just as quickly." Thunder shook his pipe, and threw the ashes into the sea, then refilled it with some grass leaves before igniting his pipe once more. "If it weren't for the magical ability of your witch." "Her name is Molly," Ashes reminded him stiffly. "Ah, that's right, look at my memory." Thunder didn't seem to mind her, he just scratched the back of his head and began to laugh. "If it hadn't been for Molly, I am afraid the ship would have been overturned. Her ability is simply fantastic. I had already often thought that perhaps the witches were most suitable to be explorers." "Isn't that already the case?" Tilly smiled, "a witch who had already inherited the name of the most outstanding explorer?" "Well," Thunder took a deep breath through the pipe, and afterwards sent out a long string of smoke, "I wish for it to be so." "There it was again," Ashes frowned, "they once more said something I cannot understand." She bluntly left the bow, instead going to the stern trying to calm her emotions. Her Majesty seemed to be very urgent to explore the ruins. After cleaning the fjord of the church, she had immediately made all arrangements to go out to sea. And to her surprise, Her Majesty unexpectedly also said that she wanted to go in person. Regardless of how Ashes tried to discourage her, it was all useless. Arriving in the stern, she saw Molly sitting there controlling her magic servant, who in turn was holding a fishing rod, learning how to fish from the sailors. Even though the sailors seemed to oppose it when the witches first got on board, but since yesterday's hurricane, everyone's attitude had turned completely upside down. Molly had summoned her servant and ordered it to rapidly expand, swallowing the middle part of the ship, making it impossible for anything to reach them, whether it was the rain or the wind. Although the ship was hit by one surging wave after another, making it move up and down, the hull still remained as stable as always. Nowadays, each of the sailors treated the witches as their good luck charm, even going so far as saying that in the future they would be too afraid to go to sea if a witch didn't accompany them. "Elder Sister Ashes, look at the big fish I caught." Molly pointed to the barrel behind her. Inside there lay a scaleless sea fish with long, sharp, and pointed mouth, looking completely different than the river fishes she had seen in Grey Castle. "What is this?" "Swordfish. They like to follow and travel together with the ships, but sometimes they will attack the hull with their mouth and break it apart," a sailor replied, "but they are also very delicious to eat, especially the belly meat. After you put it in your mouth, it melts like ice on your tongue." He smacked his lips. "This evening everyone can enjoy the freshly cooked swordfish for themselves." It seems as if I've got another fish, Molly shouted. Ashes merely saw a dark shadow moving under the dark blue water surfaces, but along with the magical servant's movement of the rod, the shadow became bigger and bigger, breaking through the water surface soon. This is, the sailor stared blankly. No, quickly throw away the fishing rod. His voice hadn't fallen yet, as already a monstrous creature jumped out of the water, its broad mouth wide open, directly flowing to Molly, wanting to swallow her. In a moment it would have consumed the whole target, but Ashes was even faster than this monster. She picked Molly up with her left hand while drawing her huge sword with her other hand, directly striking it on the head. The monster issued a pained scream as it was sent from the air onto the planks. Then quickly began to move its 6-foot-long body, trying to flee back into the water. However, Ashes never let it have the opportunity. She put Molly down, grabbed her sword with the reverse grip and nailed the monster directly onto the deck. For a moment it continued to twitch, then it spat out a string of white bubble from its mouth, soon stopping all movement. What is this? At this moment Ashes finally had the opportunity to take a careful look at the monster before her eyes. It somewhat resembled a fish, yet it also had short crab-like legs. The wide-open mouth was almost as big as she herself was and was filled with dense rows of sharp teeth. But the most disgusting thing was the pair of hairy arms growing from the side of its mouth, which was even split up into 5 fingers, just looking like a human hand in general. A variation of the sea ghosts, the still shocked sailor answered, patting his chest. They often disguise themselves as fish and take the angler's bite and drag them back into the water. Furthermore, I have also heard that only after eating a human will they be able to grow their hands. Your last part is just an unfounded rumor, someone said from behind. Turning around, Ashes discovered that Thunder and Tilly had both come over. Captain, the sailor shouted, abashedly stuck out his tongue and quickly stepped aside. The more sensational a rumor is, the more inaccurate it is. Thunder came over and kicked against one of the monster's legs. In fact, it also has another name with which you are perhaps more familiar with. Which one? Ashes asked. Demonic beast, he stated slowly. Sir Thunder, fog ahead. The lookout suddenly shouted. Everyone cheer up. Then Thunder loudly ordered, put the sail down, we are now entering the Shadow Sea. Ashes noted that just moments ago the sunny and cloudless sky had suddenly become all gloomy, turning the blue sea into a dark shade, as if a mass of ink was spreading under the water surface. The entire ship was soon enclosed by a dense fog. Standing at the stern of the ship she couldn't even see the figurehead that was at the bow. What's going on? Tilly could not help but grab Ash's arm. It's the proof that we aren't sailing in the wrong direction, Thunder jokingly stated. When the Shadow Islands emerge from the sea will create a thick mist. Of course, the correct way to say it would be that the seawater is just at low tide, around 10 feet (3.3 meters) lower than it is normally. The massive decline will produce a large amount of mist and reefs that will appear everywhere. So, if we are even a little careless, we will sink ourselves. Now, I will need your help to ensure that the ship doesn't smash against something. After his words, all the people came to the bow, and just like they had done during the hurricane, Molly's servant expanded as far as it could, swallowing the bow and even reached into the water. So even if the bow hit against a reef, her magic servant would be the first to feel it. In case you didn't have us witches, what did you do then? Ashes asked. Then we would only be able to rely on our patience and luck, Thunder sighed. The fleet would send out a small boat in front of it as a pathfinder, and after receiving confirmation that the path is safe, we would follow after it. But this area of the sea is not peaceful. As you have seen before, the closer you come to the Shadow Islands, the greater the danger becomes. There is the fog, the reefs, and the sea monsters. That is also why, even so though many explorers had already reached this place, only a few of them were able to find the entrance to the ruins. After sailing like this for about 2 hours, the fog gradually vanished, allowing Ashes to see more and more from the surrounding islands. But only a scarce bits of vegetation was to be seen. Besides some green moss or algae, there were only many crustaceans that were climbing over the rocks. Will all these islands sink into the water? That's right, just like on Sleeping Island, but here the tide and low tide interval are much faster, changing around every half-moon cycle. Thunder replied, moreover its rise and fall speed is incredibly quickly, as if there is a huge hole at the bottom of the sea which swallows all of the surrounding water. I even think that the reason why the sea level in the fjord change is related to this place. If you are lucky, we can even see how the main island will raises out of the sea. Chapter 233 Ancient Ruins. The further east they sailed, the thinner the fog became, but the sky still remained gloomy as if the sun was unable to reach this part of the sea. The surrounding reefs also got higher and higher, gradually turning into sturdy stone pillars. Ashes didn't know why the ship was still stable, even though the water level was steadily falling. Even the rolling sea waves have lost their power, including the spray, which was now as tranquil as a lake without wind. Why don't you just wait for the seawater to reach the lowest level before you enter the Shadow Sea? Tilly asked, puzzled. Then you do not have to be afraid of hitting the rocks, after all, by then all the reefs will be exposed. Because if we wait until the seawater ebbed away, we won't be able to see the ghost Red River, which shows us explorers the only channel leading to the ruins, Thunder explained. These pillar-like islands you see everywhere aren't fixed, with each ebb and flow their position will change. And it must be said that the seawater will swallow the majority of these pillars, so they cannot be used to locate the direction. Ghost Red River? Tilly asked, confused. That's right. Look, there it is. Thunder whistled and pointed to the bow. Looking in the direction he pointed, the witches saw the dark blue sea, with a few red figures within, flashing through their view, like a phantom. But soon, another 2 or 3 red shadows came drifting along, and this time Ashes could clearly make out their bodies. They were fish, that had completely red scales. Are they fish? They are the unique red scales fish from Shadow Island. Thunder stroked his chin and laughed. Later on you will see the actual color of the ghost Red River. Gradually, more and more fish were gathered together, no longer just the small groups of just 2 or 3. Instead, they had gathered together in massive swarms, collectively swimming in the direction the stern was pointing. Looking far ahead, Ashes was stunned by the scene she saw. More and more fish had come together to form a powerful current, making it appear as if there was a thick dark red carpet within the sea. The sailing ship visibly sailed forward along this red line, and when the bulge passed through the shoal of fish, from time to time sounds of collisions could be heard. So, that's the reason. Ashes suddenly recognized that this was the ghost Red River, a strange non-existent river. As the ship continued to move forward, the dense shoal of fish expanded to such an extent that the channel could accommodate several ships side by side. Slowly the dark blue water seemed to completely disappear as if the sailing ship was traveling on top of the fish. If they hadn't been moving in opposite directions, Ashes would even believe that the ship was being carried by these fish. Why are they doing this? Tilly asked in surprise. Ashes also very much wanted to ask this question. She had absolutely never seen such a scene before, in Grey Castle or any other kingdom, covered in dense fog, under a gloomy sky, the bizarre huge rocks and the red-scaled fish forming a river. For the first time, she was awed by the wonder of the sea. It is because of the main island, Thunder said. It's just like a triangular spire, with a massive cave running through the middle of it where these red-scaled fish like to lay their eggs and give birth to the next generation. Then during the ebb, the cave will emerge out of the water, and the shoal of fish that are staying in that habitat will always be the first to experience the change of water level will begin rushing out. So as long as we just follow the Red River, we will be able to arrive at the main island of the Shadow Islands. Captain Thunder, there is a huge obstacle ahead. It looks like a mountain, the lookout suddenly shouted. It seems that we are reaching our goal, Thunder said, shaking his pipe. Ladies, welcome to the Shadow Islands. Not long after, Ashes finally saw the main island appear. Just like Thunder had said, it looked as if several pieces of it had come together forming a triangle which was wide at the base and narrow at the top, with a surface which at first glance looked very smooth, not at all resembling a natural creation. But believing that the whole spire had been sculpted by people was a bit too hard to believe. Just the exposed part of the tower already reached the size of half of King's City, while the hole in its middle was large enough to entirely enclose the Tower of Babel the church has built at Hermes. The sea was still retreating, and water rushed out of the cave just like a waterfall, while the shoal of fish completely covered the parts of the island that were still emerging. As far as Ashes could see, the whole sea had been dyed red, letting her wonder if perhaps millions of scarlet-red fish had been living in the cave. Waiting until the sky had turned dark, the sea water finally retreated, revealing the bottom of the cave. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Thunder ordered his sailor to stop the ship and connect it with a long, thick hemp rope to a copper stake. Standing at the edge of the gigantic cave, you could see right through it to the mouth at the other side, yet light coming in from both sides could still only illuminate a minuscule area, with the center of the cave being almost pitch black, causing people feel an ineffable oppression. "Did you left these stakes behind the last time you were here?" Ashes asked. "No," Thunder shook his head. "When I came here for the first time, they had already been here. It should be the former inhabitants of the ruins who built them." "The ruins, where are they?" He smiled and pointed upwards. "Just above us, we're at the entrance to the ruins." The following part of the journey could only be described with one word: inconceivable. The witches followed Thunder and his sailors and entered the gigantic hole through a stone gate, following the stone steps, along which the water was still flowing down, taking one step at a time, slowly spiraling towards the top. Even though everyone was holding a torch, their flickering flames only allowed an extremely limited view, hiding the end of the staircase in darkness, and making them feel both weak and small. When they proceeded through the darkness of the abyss, Tilly tightly grabbed Ash's arm, no any longer showing her usual calm and composed expression. "This is the princess I know all too well," Ashes thought. Even in the palace, she had always followed her own ideas. The fifth princess who confronted any challenge with confidence, had only one weakness: her fear of darkness. Even in the middle of the night, her room had to always be lit with candles. And after their escape from the palace, whenever it was impossible to do so, she would ask Ashes to accompany her in her sleep. While walking inside of the damp and dark spire, Ash's mood instead became a lot more cheerful. All along the way they didn't come across any demonic beast or any mechanism to block intruder. Even if they had, after being immersed in the seawater for so long, it would have most likely lost its effectiveness by now. The only problem was the endless climbing, which physically exhausted a large part of their group, slowing everyone's movement more and more. So when the stone steps finally came to an end, the whole team could not help but burst into cheers. The last barrier was not a stone door, but a door made out of metal, which brightly reflected the torchlight. Stepping forward, Thunder placed his hands on it and pushed, slowly opening the massive door panels with an ear-piercing screeching sound. Grabbing her sword with one hand, Ashes was the first to enter the room. Only after confirming that there was no danger, were Tilly and the other witches allowed to step into the hall. After hanging the torches along the walls, a large hall appeared in front of everyone. Although wide, the room seemed empty. One glance was enough to have seen the whole room and come to the conclusion that there was nothing worth finding here. "This is the ruins?" She removed the dirt from a green stone table with the palm of her hand. "Apart from some stone tables and stools, there is nothing else here." "Indeed, there is not much left," nodded Thunder. "The ruins have slept at the bottom of the sea for too long. Apart from stone, everything else is hard to conserve. I already told it to Her Highness Tilly beforehand, but she still insisted on seeing it for herself." "The red stone, where did you find it?" Tilly opened her mouth and asked. "Where, exactly, did you find it?" "Right away on the ground. At that time, they were scattered all over the place. There were probably dozens of them." However, there was now nothing left. When Ashes looked at the ground, she saw nothing besides the ground covered in seaweed that also made it slippery. After the ruins were discovered by Thunder, many other explorers had arrived here. One after another had come to plunder this place, so if they were able to find a magic stone, it would be a curious occurrence. But Tilly was still in high spirits. Holding her torch up high, she carefully searched through every corner of the hall, especially in the darker places, which was where she would ask the sailors to come over with some more torches. Meanwhile, Molly summoned her magical servant, letting it spread over the ground, turning it into a cushion for everyone to rest on. Ashes instead kept herself constantly at Tilly's side, and overlooked her, feeling the wall to examine it. "Hey," the fifth princess suddenly shouted and stopped, "what is this?" When Ashes looked down at Tilly's hand, she merely saw a piece of a wall covered with green algae, but then she discovered a faint reflection of their flames. Tilly immediately reached out with her hands to tear the algae off, exposing a gem half buried into the wall to their eyes. It had a prism-like shape, and was almost arm-thick, and sparkled as brightly in its scarlet color. But it seemed to be inlaid in a golden frame, like a card slot to be fixed inside. Even soaked in seawater for so long, and the gold, just like the stone, was as bright and clean as if it was new. Tilly tried to pulling out the stone, but the precious gem didn't move a single bit. "Let me try it," Ashes offered. The fifth princess shook her head, seemingly thinking about something. She then put her hand on the prism and closed her eyes. Suddenly, a brilliant light flashed through the center of the prism. When nothing further happened, Ashes already thought that her eyes had played her a trick on her. But then, a rumbling sound could be heard coming from behind the wall, as if a mechanism had suddenly began to move. In no time the sound spread through the entire hall. It seemed as if the rumbling noise was coming from everywhere, followed by the sudden appearance of a soft light on top of the wall. Even the ceiling above their head began to light up. Not knowing what was going on, the sailors stood up in panic and pulled out their weapons. But as they did not know from which side they should defend themselves, they ultimately decided to gather together, standing back to back. Molly's servant once more enclosed them in its magical embrace. However, no monster appeared or rushed at them. When the sound finally calmed down, the hall started shining in bright light. Chapter 234 Gate. "This is, how did you do it?" Thunder, not believing his eyes, stared at the walls with his mouth hanging wide open. On top of the walls, tens of small holes opened up, and each of them contained a stone which emitted a pure white light. But not only on the wall, even at the edge of the ceiling this fantastic stones were embedded, surrounding the whole room. In the soft light of the stones, every detail within the hall became visible at a glance. It was the first time that Ashes saw the explorer show such an expression, and seeing it immediately filled her heart with joy. "Don't you know? By willing magical power into these stones, witches can arouse additional abilities." "Then what is with these stones, are they also magic stones?" Thunder, cautious and solemn, took one piece of the light stones and held it within his hands, but even after taking it out of the hole, the light the stone released didn't weaken to the slightest amount. "I don't know," Tilly shook her head. "These stones may have been here for hundreds of years, in case the ruins have such a long history. Previously they were all hidden behind a slate, therefore not visible to our eyes. And if you want to start the unique mechanism, you can only accomplish it with a witch's ability." "Wasn't it you who let them light up?" "No, the ability to light up comes from the stones themselves." Tilly grabbed another piece of the magic stones and held it in front of her eyes. The pure white light then caressed her beautiful face, in case they were a device which required magic in the same way that the flame cannot easily leave the candle. "From my perspective, besides containing these stones, there is nothing special about the holes in the wall. If it really is like you said and they can light on their own, and they continued to light for hundreds of years, then their value is practically unable to be estimated." Thunder clicked his tongue in wonder. "You must know that the Kingdom of Eternal Winter produces crystals, which had the size of a fist, already sell for several hundred of gold royals, but their brightness is even less than half of this." The moment the sailor heard such an astonishing price, their kind of gaze with which they looked at the stones immediately changed. "According to our agreement, you can take away half," Tilly noncommittally stated, as if this was none of her concern. Now that she had sufficient light, she began exploring the hall even more carefully. Unable to bear seeing Tilly tear at the seaweed with her own hands, Ashes bluntly lifted her huge sword and swung it, sweeping away the seaweed on the wall as if she was simply mowing grass. A second stone embedded within the wall was quickly uncovered. In accordance with the previous method, Tilly once more poured her magic into it. Along with a sharp and clear sound of metal clashing, everyone was amazed to see how a huge stone slab tilted down above Tilly's head. It was connected with taut copper ropes on both sides, and in between them there were unexpectedly a neatly chiseled out flight of steps. One side of the stone slab finally stopped on the ground, while the other end led to the ceiling. Looking upwards, Ashes saw a horizontal metal door blocking the end of the passage. Tilly, seeing that the fifth princess didn't hesitate to climb the stone steps, Ashes couldn't help and shout out loud, "Let me go first." "It does not matter, this time it isn't the treasure chamber." She quickly climbed to the top of the stone staircase, placed her hand on a magic stone beside the door, and as if was answering her, the metal door quickly opened. Seeing Tilly climbing through the door, disappearing in the ceiling, Ashes had no alternative other than to follow closely while keeping her sword at hand. The moment Ashes went through a hole in the roof, her eyes went wide. Above the ceiling was another room, which was much smaller than the hall below, while the walls were also embedded with illumination stones. But what surprised her the most was that there were nearly no traces of water here. Wooden tables, chairs, shelves, cabinets, all the furnishings were still intact. They were only covered with a thick layer of dust, and she could even see some broken spider webs. The shelves were all filled with rows of books that were dyed gray from the dust. In addition to the spread-out book on the table, a cup was also placed together with a kettle and a penholder. From the quill, only a lone pole was remaining and the ink had long since dried up. But even then, this room filled with shelves and the hall below was covered with algae seemed to be two completely different worlds. Thunder, who was the third one to climb the stairs, sucked in a mouth of cold air when he looked around in wonder. "This is an abandoned dwelling place," Tilly answered and took up the unfolded book on the table. She gently removed the dust from it and afterward began to look through the pages. It seems that somebody had lived here for a very long time. "What is written in the book?" "I'm unable to read it." She shook her head and showed the book to the other two. "The text is written in symbols I have never seen before." "It seems that the books on the shelves are the same," Ashes said, while removing the dust on the spines, revealing a text written in strange wavy lines, leaving her unable for her to grasp its meaning. "We can take them back with us and study them slowly," Tilly laughed. "By agreement, all the books and magic stones we discovered belong to us." "Of course," Thunder touched his beard, "but when you have grasped their meaning, I hope you will share their ancient story with me." "No problem." The three people slowly circled the room, carefully searching and touching everything with their hands. This way they quickly came to understand the general situation of this place. They were unable to find any other stones, but on one side of the room they found a strange device. At first glance, it looked like a thick metal pipe, one end of which was embedded into the stone wall, while the other side constantly became narrower until it was only had the thickness of a wrist, and in its tip was a glass lens embedded. "What is this?" Ashes knocked against its body, creating a series of clear echoes inside, indicating that the middle of the tube was hollow. It resembled a bit the observation mirrors we are using for sailing. Maybe the people who previously lived here have used it to observe the outside world. Then Thunder placed his eye in front of the lens, trying to look through it, but after a moment he said, "Everything is black. I can't see anything, it seems to be broken." "Not necessarily," Tilly pointed at the wall behind the metal tube, "Look here." Following the direction of her finger, Ashes merely saw a copper plate with a handle on top of it embedded into the wall, and at the bottom of the handle was a small hole, which seemed to be the place to insert a key. The fifth princess walked over and tried to pull the handle, but the copper plate didn't move a single jot. "It seems to be locked." "I will try it." Ashes grasped the handle, gathered her power and pulled. The entire copper plate immediately came off the wall. "Ha, apparently you have guessed correctly," Thunder applauded loudly. "It is once more a magic stone mechanism." Hidden behind the copper plate was a groove that was stuck within a huge magic stone. The difference between the two previous magic stones and this one was its size. It looked much larger, and its color also looked more purple than scarlet. "Do you want to activate it?" Ashes asked. "Yes," Tilly nodded without the slightest hesitation, placing her hand on top of the stone, but this time even after a long moment, nothing seems to happen. "What's the problem?" "It's too big," Tilly slowly said. Small beads of sweat already began to appear on her forehead. "It feels like it is unceasingly absorbing my magic power. Apparently, the mechanism it has to fuel is utterly enormous." "Then forget about it," Ashes said with a frown. She knew the moment a witch had thoroughly exhausted her magic power. she will most likely immediately fall into a coma. And right now, in this dangerous place, it would definitely not be a good idea to deplete all of one's magic power here. No, it will be fine. I can feel it. Tilly's voice had not even fallen, before a loud rumbling sound came from inside the wall that was like unceasingly rolls of thunder, and eventually the whole room began to shake. Is this an earthquake? Thunder grasped the metal pipe to keep himself from falling. Ashes instead immediately seized Lily and pulled her into her embrace. The dust began to fall from the books, and the three people began to cough. This kind of earthquake continued for nearly a quarter of an hour until finally calming down. When the vibration stopped, Molly came up, stuck her head through the door and asked, "What happened?" "We activated a new mechanism," Ashes replied. "Is everything okay below?" Everyone was frightened, furthermore many roof plates began to fall, and I had to cover everyone with my servant. The little girl answered while curiously coming over, "Tilly, what are you looking at?" Surprisingly, Tilly didn't give her an answer. Instead she had closed one eye and pressed the other in front of the lens, staying quiet for a long time until she exclaimed in amazement, "This is simply incredible." Ashes, becoming curious, also stepped in front of the lens, and when the scene in front of her eye became clear, she was left speechless. At the other end of the observation mirror a vast piece of land appeared. The edge of the land looked like an overhanging cliff of which the end couldn't be seen. But erected within the center of the cliff was a gigantic and incomparable arched stone door which internal seemed deep and dark, as if it was an enormous mouth which was choosing the next person it would be devouring. Chapter 235 A Letter Beyond Expectation. Roland opened the letter while simultaneously handing a piece of jerky over to Maggie. "Goo goo." The latter opened her beak and grasped the meat with it and delivered it with 2 to 3 swallows into her belly. Then obediently placed her belly on the edge of the table, and embedding her head into her feathers. "I hope this letter finds you well, my dear older brother, or should I say your Royal Highness, Roland Wimbledon. I have received your letter, I agree with your opinion, and wholeheartedly approve of it. Even though I do not understand why you have suddenly changed your temper and corrected your previous dandy lifestyle. Even going so far as to be willing to help the witches, but now that you've done it, the church has become our common enemy. Maybe you already know this, I have become a witch. This is also the reason why everyone is willing to believe me. However, you, in fact, are a prince, a noble to the core, and yet you were also able to obtain the trust of numerous witches. It is indeed inconceivable. Ever since I received your message, I often wonder how you managed to do that. If you were simply like the other nobles, who regarded witches as tools and nothing more, then it would have been impossible for you to obtain Ash's approval, and she also never would have chosen to let Maggie stay in Border Town. Apart from this, Maggie also mentioned a steam engine, as well as the theory that knowledge could boost a witch's possibility to evolve her magic, which also sounds fascinating to me. Especially the latter, which I would like to have the opportunity to discuss with you in detail. As for your invitation, after pondering it over and over again, at present, I have no reason to refuse it. The establishment of an alliance needs trust and gives trust in turn, and in the event that we act both indecisively and cowardly, we would only be helping the church in the end. So I will attach a list to this letter which contains most of the abilities of the witches living on Sleeping Island. Like this you can pick those abilities you need the most for yourself and inform me through Maggie about your decision. If everything goes well, they will be able to leave for your territory by next month. But for safety reasons, it is better to only send 5 at the first time. Furthermore, please specify a reliable transfer procedure, and send some people out in advance who will act to protect them. Each witch lost, regardless of whether she lives in Border Town or on Sleeping Island, would be great loss and also cast a shadow over our cooperation. I hope you will take care of them as well as you take care of your own witches. And if you will, please also allow them to participate in the evening basic knowledge lessons. I believe that every witch that is able to evolve her ability will be good news for us. As you have said, the church has already shown their plan to backstab us, and it is only a matter of time until the 4 kingdoms will be annexed. I hope when that day comes, you will be ready to deal with them. But in case you will be unable to resist, Sleeping Island will always act as a safe harbor for you. Of course, I will give you as much help as possible in your fight to repel the church's invasion. Finally, may we end the church's oppression and build a new order, a kingdom in which not merely witches, but rather no one has to suffer under groundless persecution. Your sister, Tilly Wimbledon. Putting the letter down, he felt an unspeakable pleasure coming from his heart. After he smilingly put the letter away, he took another piece of jerky and held it in front of Maggie, who immediately stretched out her head to peck away the food. Goo, cuckoo. As he gently stroked the smooth feathers at her neck, she narrowed her eyes in satisfaction. It must have been tough on you, but currently lightning has followed the fleet to King City, and it will still be a few more days before she comes back, Roland said with a smile. However, you can go look for Nana or leaves to play with, or go to the bathroom to take a bath, or just lie down and sleep. Goo, goo. Maggie spread out her wings, jumped off the table, and then flew out of the window, soon disappearing. The cries she had just issued should mean something like "I'm not tired, I want to find them and play." Roland suddenly discovered that now, even when she was speaking in her pigeon form, he could still understand her general meaning. Is this the power of habit? Beside that, he also never imagined that Tilly would actually agree to his invitation, furthermore even attach a list of their witches' abilities. This was simply a big treasure house, Although the letter never specified how long they would stay for, in case they wanted to attend the complete primary education curriculum, they would at least need to spend half a year in Border Town. Furthermore, if he added additional content to the course, expanding the length to a full year, how much change could the witches bring to Border Town in that time? Moreover, in case they were able to evolve, his benefits would be much greater than his losses. If they stayed in Border Town, they could help him improve this place further, but even if the witches went back to Sleeping Island, they would still be a living symbol of propaganda for him. With word-of-mouth-to-mouth publicity, the number of witches who would want to go to Border Town would only become more, and Tilly wouldn't be able to prevent this development from occurring. Roland believes that compared with coercing them with promises or intimidation, waiting and showing sincerity was the right long-term strategy to use. Generally speaking, this reply brought him a nice surprise far greater than anything he had expected. Her open and positive attitude made him feel like she was a perfect teammate sent by destiny. This way, he no longer needed to fight the church by himself. As for a safe shuttle route, Roland had been thinking about this for a long time. To avoid the port of Clearwater and the Seawind region, he had thought of directly crossing through the uninhabited land south of Border Town. After arriving at the mountains, he thought about taking a hot air balloon tour to cross the mountains, gaining direct access to the town's hinterland. That way, he would from the beginning to the end not have to pay any attention to the church, Timothy, or Garcia's forces. The more Roland thought about it, the more excited he became. He suppressed his urge to immediately skim over the appendix and chose the witches and instead turned his attention to the present urgent matters that needed to be solved. After all, which kind of witches Sleeping Island sent was an issue for next month, but Border Town's currently most significant problem was the housing construction. Since the First Army had sailed to King City, an endless stream of refugees had arrived in Border Town. In order to prevent the disease from spreading, Roland had arranged an area west of the city wall all for them. There he had organized for long rows of wooden sheds to be built, providing a temporary place for the refugees to live in. Together with the serfs living on the other side of the Redwater River, their number already surpassed 8,000 people. In case the number of refugees will stay at the level of the last days, this number of people will most likely break through 10,000 in total. Guaranteeing a supply of food for these people was not a problem. After all, since the end of the months of demons, Border Town had continuously imported food without interruption, but the accommodation issue was clearly a big problem. During the summer, it was no problem to live in a wooden shed, and besides shielding them from the sun and rain, it also offered an excellent ventilation, even though their number of mosquito bites might be higher. But once winter arrived, there would nearly be no difference between living in the sheds and under open air. The temperature outside would be the temperature inside of the wooden shed. If he was unable to let them stay in brick houses, Roland was afraid that most of the people wouldn't survive past the long winter. In other words, Border Town had to build houses and dormitories for 10,000 people within the next 6 months. Roland spread out a new piece of paper and picked up the pen. He intended to take a part of the workers currently constructing the Kingdom Avenue and put them to work building the houses. After all, it wasn't a big problem if the road construction got delayed by 10 days or half a month, but if the people froze to death within his territory, it would leave a stain on his achievements. Even when he had only recently crossed over and had no money, and none of the nobles wanted to help him, he was still able to ensure that not one person died during the months of demons because from hunger or cold. So, now with the witch union and the steam engine, as well as substantial income and workforce, he naturally couldn't allow such a situation to occur. But at this moment, Carter suddenly walked into the office. "Your Royal Highness, I have bad news," Carter said with a serious face. "The chemical laboratory just exploded." Chapter 236 Chemical Accident. Roland immediately rushed towards the laboratory next to the Redwater River. Arriving at the scene, Roland discovered that the damage wasn't as severe as he had imagined. At least the main building for refining acid completely lacked any damage, while the windows at the side building had shattered into pieces. "My lord, please save our teacher. He is so badly hurt, almost on the point of death." Seeing that Roland had appeared, the group of disciplines immediately gathered around him but were soon stopped by his personal guards. Roland waved his hand, indicating that they don't need to be so anxious. "Where are the others? Let me have a look at them first." Then he turned Carter and whispered, "Where's Nana?" "I've already sent someone, so I estimate that she will be here soon." "All right." Roland nodded and then entered the laboratory, under protection of his guards. Kyle Sichi was lying on the ground, leaving a bloodstain on the ground, which extended from him to the side room, giving the general idea that the accident must have happened in the side room and that he had been dragged to the main room after. His face was only an indistinct mass, with blood and other liquids mixed together, which should have been caused by the strong acid which had splashed on him during the explosion. He was also missing several fingers on his hands, and within the flesh he could see the white finger phalanges. The apprentices had already provided him with emergency treatment, letting Roland see that they had also met similar situations in Redwater City. Dragging the people away from the danger, binding the wound to stop the bleeding, then seek help, these measures were all done quite well. However, receiving this kind of injury, and only having herbal medicine and the body's own healing ability as treatment, would lead to 10 out of 10 people dying. Roland ordered his guards to wait at the door, not letting anyone enter. Waiting for Nana's arrival, Carter and he went into the side room, trying to find the alchemist's fingers. Otherwise, even if the little girl healed his injuries, he would no longer be able to carry out his chemical experiments, which definitely would be a great loss for Border Town. "It looks like a violent wind had swept through here," Carter said and then pointed at his nose. "Furthermore, there is an unpleasant odor here. That is the smell of nitrogen dioxide." Roland carefully swept his eyes all over the room. Seeing that all the windows were open, he concluded that the possibility of poisoning wasn't large. At most, there were merely some leftover fumes which hadn't yet vanished. On the test stage, one bottle lay broken on the table. Its acid had flown over the table's surface, gathered on the floor and left behind a damp patch. "Remember as you search through the tools, never to touch them directly with your hands," the prince reminded Carter. "There are gloves in the closet." Since Soraya's ability had evolved, he had also sent a dozen pairs of thin and anti-corrosive gloves to the laboratory, but looking at the alchemist's horrible injuries, it was evident that he had been working on the test object without wearing them. In case he had worn the gloves, even if the explosion had blown his fingers away, at least his fingers would still be within the gloves. When Roland looked through the closet above the test stand, something unusual attracted his attention. After he had taken the unusually formed bottle down and taken a closer look, he was convinced that it was actually the liquor he sold at the convenience market, and the amount left inside showed that a lot of it had already been drunk, leaving only half a bottle behind. Kyle actually brought white liquor into the laboratory? It is hard to imagine that an experienced alchemist would be drinking during an experiment. "Your Royal Highness, Miss Nana has arrived," a guard reported. Good, continue to guard the door, don't let any of the apprentices enter, leaving Carter behind, who continued to rummage through the chaos to find the fingers. Roland immediately went back to the main room. Is it him? For Nana, treating this sort of level of injury was already nothing out of the ordinary. The little girl who had previously been so scared of seeing blood and fainted whenever she encountered terrible wounds, had already grown up a lot, whether it was in regards to ability or courage. First start with curing the corrosion wounds on his face, Roland nodded. Carter is currently looking for his missing fingers. When he finds them, you can connect them again later. That won't be necessary, Nana responded proudly, by now I'm already able to heal such small wounds. The startled Roland could only look on as she laid her hands on top of the alchemist's chest, closed her eyes, and Kyle's injuries immediately began healing. His face was soon completely restored, and his disabled fingers unexpectedly began extending, healing at a slower rate. First, the bones regrew, followed by the flesh, and finally nails and hairs. About a quarter of an hour later, his fingers had been completely restored. At this point, Carter also came back out of the side room. Your Royal Highness, I was only able to find 3 of them, the last one might have already been destroyed during the explosion, eh? Since when have you been able to do this? Roland asked Nan in surprise when she opened her eyes again. Roughly a week ago, when the current chicken for my training lost a limb, I discovered that as long as I pour enough magic into it, I can slowly let it regrow. She stuck out her tongue, probably because I recalled what you had said, that every part of the body is composed out of the same cells, which meant that the cutoff area was also only a loss of cells. Since my magic can make up for the damaged parts, why shouldn't it also be able to make up for the lost parts? And then I tried to do it. Are you able to regrow every part? The regrow takes a lot of effort, Nana said, shaking her head. Even though this method is very easy, and as long as it is only fingers, it is okay. But if it's an arm or a leg, I cannot help it. After all, the amount of magic I can hold is far less than that of Sister Anna. That's because you're still a minor, Roland thought. Moreover, was this new capacity because of the evolution of her magic, or is it just the result of her training, leading to an increase of her magic capacity, allowing her to achieve an effect which had previously been impossible? Currently, Nightingale is not here to determine whether Nana's magic source had given birth to changes or not. If this change is only because of an increase of her magic, the little girl's performance after she reaches adulthood is something he looked forward to. Your Royal Highness, he woke up, Carter interrupted. What's wrong? Kyle frowned, first looked at his intact hands, then touched his face. Shouldn't I? Should you have been killed during a chemical accident? Usually yes, but this which saved your life. This person besides me had undertaken the task of rescuing and giving medical treatment to your people, Miss Nana Pine. Roland decided to directly reveal Nana's identity to the chief alchemist. A man who had rushed to Border Town because of an equation for a chemical reaction shouldn't be an incorrigibly or stubborn person. Even if he thought of witches as disgusting in his heart, it would be unlikely that he would abandon his work and run over to the church to report. And now since they had Lucia in town, it was only a matter of time until the alchemists and witches had to work together. For goodness sake. Do you mean that this witch can cure alchemy? No, the trauma caused by chemical experiments? Roland hasn't foreseen that Kyle's reaction was totally contrary to what he had expected. Ha ha ha, this is excellent, Your Royal Highness, this means that I can go through with experiments, without worrying about the dangers. In the end, what happened? Roland sighed in relief. Why did you bring the liquor into the laboratory? No, Your Royal Highness, it is merely a test item. The alchemist became entirely excited. The thing I needed to produce for you, I did it. Are you speaking of mercuric acid? That's right, Your Highness. It turned out that the missing reactant was alcohol. He said in one breath, previously I had already tested dozens of raw materials, but I was unable to make any progress. Annoyed, I went to the market and bought some liquor, but then I suddenly remembered that the elementary chemistry mentioned that alcohol is an organic solvent, which is necessary for some raw materials to react. I then distilled and purified the liquor and used it for a new reagent test, and finally, on the sixth try was a success. Within several tubes, the gray crystal's precipitation occurred, so I recorded all of their heating time and temperatures. Afterward, I extracted some of the crystal and tested them. The features they showed were the same as what you spoke of. The ash-gray needle-shaped crystal powder is extremely sensitive and irritable. Just when I wanted to filter out the rest of crystals in the tubes, the test tube suddenly exploded. So, it is done like this. At this moment, Roland also suddenly remembered it. To get mercury fulminate it was necessary to add ethanol to the mercury to access the nitric acid, or, perhaps it can be produced from the direct reaction of mercury nitrate and ethanol. Well done, Roland said and patted Kyle Seachee's shoulder. This feat is enough for you to receive Bordertown's highest honor and awards. Thus, with the cartridge problem fixed, his centerfire ammunition finally took shape. Chapter 237 Invitation. After returning to his office, Roland immediately began to draw the blueprints for the new machines. During the days, the First Army and witches had all gone to King's City. Instead of doing nothing, Roland felt that he was busier than ever. Even without Nightingale around, Anna's and his time spent alone with one another was also very rare. Besides finding a place for the refugees to live that were coming with each ship, he also asked Anna and Lucia to test the composition of smelting products together, as well as constructing a new smelting furnace. Before, no matter if it was smelting iron or making steel, it had purely been done by experience and feeling, never knowing what the result would be after the refining. But now with Lucia's help, Roland finally had a precise method for determining the composition of the ingots. With the aid from the material decomposition ability, he could finally obtain the necessary detailed data for smelting metal after repeated comparisons between results. For example, the post-melting stirring time, the exact amount of charcoal added, and whether to add limestone or other additives to remove sulfur and phosphorus, or which other metals and raw materials had to be added to get alloy and so forth. Based on these data, Roland could summarize a standard process for the smelting industry, which would guarantee the continuous production of iron ingots and steel that had the same quality each time. This would also disperse the dense fog hovering over the material science and engineering field. The new smelting furnace had also been built for this reason. It was a square furnace with a length and width of 4 meters, and a height of 2 meters, with the bottom tilted towards one end. Its thick outer shell was made of pig iron, while the internal layer consisted of clay bricks as well as Soraya's earth coating, which all guaranteed excellent heat resistance. The lower end was provided with a movable gate, which was driven by a steam engine. Considering that those high-end heating methods, such as oxygen, electric arc, and so on haven't reached the implementation stage yet, the furnace simply didn't have any combustion systems installed, and depended entirely on Anna's black fire for smelting molten steel. After adding the right amount of raw materials and to smelt the metal in accordance with the finished test, the molten steel was directly discharged from the tailgate. The furnace could produce 50 tons of steel at once, and with it, Anna would only need a short half-hour to complete the smelting. Together with the feeding and tapping time, it would take around 1 hour to complete. Its output could then meet the current need for firearms and artillery production. Nowadays the town smelting plan was that the group of blast furnaces and shaft furnace were responsible for producing a great amount of pig iron, which was not only be used in the manufacturing of the daily use ironware and steam engines but could also be used as the raw material for further smelting, for example wrought iron or steel. The blueprints Roland was currently drawing was the set of production equipment used for bullet stamping. With a stable and reliable source of steel, processing and assembling a stamping machine would no longer be hindered by material problems. So, when the trial production of the mercury fulminate succeeded, they could immediately start with mass production of the new bullets. Even though cutting with Anna's black fire was efficient and accurate, but even in the case where a person could complete the whole process, they would still need to spend a long time doing so. However, in the event that a line of stamping machines was put into production, after learning how to operate them, more than 30 ordinary people could at least produce 10,000 bullets per day. Furthermore, the soldiers would also no longer need to manually reload their ammunition. Even after dinner, he was still busy drawing. Only when the sound of the midnight bell came through the window could his set of sketches be considered complete. Of course, this was merely the most initial plan of his concept. He still didn't know if some of the details was feasible, and because of this it needed to be tested before he could finalize his plan. If it were like usual, Roland would have already yawned again and again, but today he was in high spirits, not feeling even a little sleepy at all. After putting the more than 10 recently drawn draft papers away, Roland took the attached parchment to the 5th princess letter out of the drawer, spread it over the table, and finally came to the long-awaited task, the selection of the visiting witches. The list held more than 60 auxiliary witches and their abilities, but from Maggie's mouth, Roland had heard that Sleeping Island sheltered between 200 to 300 people, which made it obviously that Tilly had not put all of the auxiliary witches on the list at his table. This was also in line with the way a leader should behave, taking the initiative to reach out her hand in friendship, rather than holding on to family bonds. In this way, the opposite party had already expressed enough of their sincerity in wishing to form an alliance. Then Roland put up a new candle and concentrate on going over the witch abilities on the appendix. He soon had to acknowledge that this was a tough decision to make, but after going through the list many times and comparing them from all sides, he finally chose the name of his 5 visitors. Roland then spread out a new piece of parchment and began to write his reply. My dear sister, I am very glad to have received your letter. I am excited and pleased with your decision. With your assistance, I now have a bigger chance of blocking the church's assault. The reason I could obtain the witch's trust and support is because of this. Within the entire kingdom of Greycastle, only Border Town has completely erased the influence of the church. Not only do the natives accept the witches, they even fight together, side by side. Beginning from the battle against the demonic beasts up to the confrontation with the church, my people and witches have come to form an inseparable whole. Nowadays, the figures of witches can be seen everywhere within the town participating in the construction. The steam engine that makes you wonder was also only possible to achieve due to the help of a witch. All this is already a good start, and all I have to do is to extend this situation to the whole of the Western Territory, until it spreads through the entire kingdom. Therefore, I have to destroy the entire church, and turn their statement that the witches are the devil's messenger into dust. However, rescuing all the people from their ignorance and stupidity will be a long and slow process, for which I will need even more help from you. Concerning what would lead to this decision, what caused me to no longer so indifferent to everything as I was in the past, are trivialities that can slowly be elaborated on when we have the time, but the ability to express oneself in a letter is limited, so I won't say more than is necessary. Concerning the witch's visit next month, I'm very much looking forward to it. There is no reason to be anxious about their safety. I have already planned a direct route to Border Town for them, which will also allow you to avoid the eyes and ears of the church completely and which doesn't need the support of a harbor. The only risk will be the navigation. However, if you let Maggie fly in front of you to show you the way, there will only be a tiny possibility losing your way. I will attach a map with the specific route to Maggie when I send her to Sleeping Island. When these witches arrive at Border Town, they will naturally be able to participate in the lessons of basic knowledge, the so-called knowledge which boosts the evolution of the witch's ability. However, I am more inclined to the idea that it actually a deeper understanding of the world itself that leads to their transformation, whether it was regarding nature, magic, not excluding the understanding of their own person. I have not the least doubt that our odds of winning in a fight against the church increases with every witch able to evolve her ability. On this point your opinion and mine are completely in line. Finally, I will now list the 5 selected witches and I hope to see them as soon as possible. Land Shaper, Lotus. State Preserver, Candle. Winemaker, Evelyn. Beast Tamer, Honey. As well as Eye of Truth, Sylvie. I wish you all the best. Your brother, Roland Wimbledon. Chapter 238 How could I possibly regret this? A week later, the expedition of the First Army and witches finally returned to Border Town. From the date of their departure until their return, the mission had almost lasted half a month, 5 days longer than expected. The main reason for the delay was that on the day the fleet had set out on the way home, Longsong Stronghold acting Duke Petrov's messenger arrived in Border Town, reporting the outbreak of an unknown plague in the stronghold. Due to Roland's previous warning, the moment when Petrov became aware of the disease, he took measures to isolate the patients as well as possible, and completely closed down the city, then immediately sent a messenger over to border town. After receiving the report of an outbreak, Roland sent Maggie out, and had her fly with great speed eastwards along the Redwater River, looking for the fleet carrying the First Army, to give them the order to change their route and take the Fork to Longsong stronghold. Later, after the eradication of the demonic plague, once more set out to return home. On the day of their return, Roland led all the other members of the First Army and the families of the expedition members to the docks to celebrate their smooth return. Accompanied by the sound of the familiar army march, the soldiers excitedly saluted the prince, while many other people imitated the knighting ceremony and went down on one knee to loudly shout out "Long live His Highness." After they had walked down the pier, they fell into the arms of their loved ones and tightly hugged them, accentuated by Echo's timely gun salute. The atmosphere of the scene became so lively that it attracted the refugees and the serfs to soon come join them. Back in the castle, Iron Axe gave a full report on the mission. "You mean to say that the enemy attacking the First Army had a witch within their ranks?" After thinking about it for a moment, Roland continued. "It's unlikely that she was part of the street rats. Theo thinks the same thing, he even believes that the rats belong to another force. Otherwise, those scum would almost never leave their nest and try to operate outside of it. The only forces in King City that can control the rats and could also possess a witch are the Church and King Timothy." Iron Axe said, "Even those other powerful nobles would be unable to force the largest street rats organization to move at full strength, and leave their nest vulnerable. But Timothy is actually in the eastern region, and I don't believe that he is daring enough to send a witch out to fight alone. I think that the Church is more suspect." Thinking of Wendy and Ash's encounters with the Church, it wasn't surprisingly to Roland that the Church had trained a group of witches in secret. "Are you sure she's dead?" "Nightingale's shot hit her in the chest, breaking her thoracic cavity into pieces," Iron Axe said while nodding. "We buried her in the wheat field, at the place where we found the remains of our sentry." At the end of their last day, their team of 300 people had met an attack of a vast number of rats with the final result of 1 dead and 4 injured. The only victim was the soldier who died by the hands of the witch. The other 4 injured had been hit by lucky crossbow shots from the approaching rats. With their revolver rifles' greater firepower, the fight was already over before it even came to the melee combat phase. The wounded soldiers had immediately been properly bandaged and sent back to Border Town to be treated by Nana. It was due to the presence of Lily that their injuries showed almost no sign of infection. As long as the crossbow arrows did not hit vital organs and they were able to stop the bleeding soon enough, the chance for the injured to survive was very good. In general, seeing the First Army acquiring this kind of result during their second expedition made Roland feel very satisfied. As for how to hinder the enemy from successful attacking the sentries, Roland knew very little about that. The only thing he did know was that they needed to set up the posts so that they could always monitor one another, but how to do it exactly was a task better left to Iron Axe to handle. "You have worked hard. I will hold a ceremony at the central square of the town tomorrow. You should go and notify all members of the First Army about it." When Iron Axe finally retired, Roland let out a long breath. "Well done." With these words, Roland took a bag of grilled fish from the drawer and put it on the table. "If it hasn't been for you, I'm afraid they would have been in great danger." At his words, Nightingale's figure appeared at his side and with a smile accepted the dried fish. "Like I said before, I had everything under my control." "How was the strength of the other side?" "She was very agile and acted very determined. I think she should have been in training for several years. If it wasn't for her trying to resist at the same time as I entered my fog, I can't say for sure if I would have been able to avoid being hit by her fine powder." Nightingale just shrugged it off and tried to seem casual during her report of the following events, but he still became aware of her discomfort when she told about the shooting. "But, when I saw the look in her eyes when she stabbed at Wendy, I came to an understanding that with the exception of death there was nothing that would stop her." For a moment Roland was silent. "Do you still remember what you said to me on the way back after the defeat of Timothy's militia?" Nightingale thought back. "This is not your fault?" "That's it," he nodded. If she were a witch who was raised by the church from early on, she would always treat you as a traitor, a fallen. Even after a few years of coexistence, it would still be tough to cure her of that way of thinking. At least with her death, you were able to save Wendy's life. Nightingale began to laugh. Are you trying to comfort me? Coo, Roland coughed twice. Those were my real thoughts. Feel relieved. I won't feel sad for the enemy. Although she was a witch, the path she chose was entirely different from the one I desire to see in the future. This is the same I already said aboard during the journey back. Nightingale picked up a piece of dried fish and put it into her mouth. I just knocked the enemy down while protecting my sisters. I only fulfilled my duty, nothing more. It is good if you can think like that, Roland said happily. It seems that he had still underestimated her, with his thought that she would feel lost and confused after personally killing another witch, never expecting that she would be able to adjust to it in just a short time. It appears that in both mind and belief, Nightingale was coming close to reaching maturity. She swallowed the fish, hesitated for a moment and then opened her mouth to say, "But there is one little thing I want to ask you." What? What were you and Anna doing during these days? Even though Nightingale's voice became lower and lower, her eyes kept their focus on the prince. You know what I'm talking about. Roland almost knocked the cup over in his hands. Kiki, asking this so suddenly, what do you? During these days I have been occupied with finding a place to settle the refugees. There wasn't much chance to be alone with her. Immediately her eyes began to lit up. That wasn't a lie. Of course not, I was. Before another word could escape Roland's lips, Nightingale suddenly vanished into thin air, immediately following which he felt a pair of soft lips on his mouth, after a fleeting touch only leaving behind the light flavor of salty fish. It took him a long while until he realized what had just happened. Wait. Once more he couldn't finish what he wanted to say. This time, two slender fingers sealed his mouth, even though he couldn't see her, but he knew that Nightingale was still standing at his side. I know what you want to say, she whispered next to his ear. I do not want to change anything. I don't intend to put myself between you and Anna. I merely hope to be always stay by your side, that's all. Forgive me for not daring to show my figure to you, because right now, I also don't know what kind of expression I should show when facing you. Your Highness, you don't dislike me? Roland opened his mouth, but it seemed that saying he disliked Nightingale was impossible. The barrier that kept him from accepting her was not something about like and dislike, but rather ethical, shaped by 20 years of social experience before coming to this world. By now, he could no longer deceive himself. That being the case, she whispered, do not say anything. It's not your fault, I only did what I wanted to after all. Chapter 239 Midnight Snack. After eating dinner, Anna carried a large batch of bird beak mushrooms into the kitchen. At her request, Maggie had collected these spotlessly white mushrooms in the concealing forest. They were different from common mushrooms. The bird beak mushrooms commonly grows on top of huge trees. It survives by absorbing the nutrients from the trees, but it was also the favorite food of some bird species. Although it had a very delicious taste, and its fleshy umbrella shaft was as delicate as exquisite meat, with its relatively high growing place which made it hard to discover just by standing on the ground, there weren't many people willing to climb the trees to pick these mushrooms. Her mother would always gather some for her birthday, sometimes picking more and sometimes less, but always enough to make 2 mushroom dishes to celebrate her birthday. Compared to the usual moldy and coarse bread and bland porridge, its unique flavor was hard to forget. Although nowadays, she has no longer had to worry about not getting enough food to fill her belly, these days the food was always varied and plentiful. She still wanted to personally make this delicious food which could only be tasted in this small town in the western region and share it with Roland Wimbledon, who was recently always so busy. The flames in kitchen stove had already been extinguished, but to Anna, this didn't pose any problem. She took some firewood from the side and threw it into the oven, and called her black flame. Just a few moments later a vigorous fire already burned within its chamber. At this time, Nightingale suddenly appeared from the wall. Hey, what are you doing? I want to make something to eat for His Highness. These days he is always staying up late to work. What about you? Ahaha, Nightingale began laughing in embarrassing, and touched the back of her head with her hand. I just came to look for a snack to eat. I'm a little hungry. After pausing for a moment, she curiously probed, what are you planning to cook? I want to make something to eat for His Highness. These last few days he is always staying up late to work. What about you? Well, honey-baked mushrooms and mushroom soup. Anna opened the bundle, revealing the bird beak mushrooms inside. They are Border Town's regional specialty. Do you want to try some? Nightingale nodded and then quickly asked, can you teach me how to make them? I also wish to learn to cook them. Yes, Anna laughed, it's quite easy. After slicing the mushrooms, she took a lot of the mushrooms and divided them between Nightingale and herself. First spread a layer of butter on both sides of the mushrooms, then carefully roast them on the fire until they are golden on all sides. Be careful not to roast them for too long, or else they will burn black. Okay, Nightingale said, took a piece of the bird beak mushrooms and imitated Anna's style of smearing oil on both sides of the mushroom. Has His Highness recently always worked until late into the night? That's right, in order to find a place for the refugees, as well as drawing blueprints for new machines, he spends almost every day after midnight before he goes to bed. There were several times when I passed by his office, that I could still see the light of the burning candles from under the door. Anna nodded once and then asked, you were gone for more than half a month, so you began to miss His Highness, right? Hearing the unexpected question, Nightingale's hand slightly trembled, dropping the mushroom into the oil. Actually it was not too bad. It wasn't limited to only you, it was also the same for Lightning, Lily, Echo, and Wendy. They all were missing His Royal Highness. They said since there was not even a bathing place, they had all wanted to return at an earlier time. Anna suddenly felt that the other's expression had become somewhat strange. Hey, what happened? Nothing, Nightingale said flustered, shook her head, took another mushroom and then said with an embarrassed smile, actually it was like that, indeed. I also longed to come back. Is that so? Anna used her hands to directly pinch the oil-coated mushrooms and threw them into the fire of the stove. If it was me who have to leave His Highness for half a month, no, maybe even just a few days would already be enough that I couldn't wait to see him again. The moment when she had met Roland Wimbledon within the dungeon was the most incredible moment in her entire life. Until today, whenever she recalled this moment, her heart would still fill with warmth and gratitude. If not for His Highness, even if she could have somehow lived on, it would only be a life in ignorance and confusion, just like those apathetic townsfolk. It was His Highness who had taught her how beautiful the world truly was. No matter if it was because of the soy paste-covered pepper steaks, or the theoretical foundations of natural science, the moment he had stepped into her life it had filled with all kinds of new stuff, allowing her to finally feel that she no longer was the same as those other people, but rather a unique and unmatched witch. She was confident that the other sisters also felt the same. As long as they were in contact with His Highness for long enough, it was impossible for them not to become caught up in his strange but clever ideas and his unique charm. This was what Anna believed without a shred of doubt. Oh, did I bake this for too long? Nightingale raised her iron fork and showed that one side of the mushroom had already become burned. A little bit, Anna couldn't suppress her laugh. Bird beak mushrooms is very tender, so it isn't necessary to roast them for a long time. Just test it some more and you will grasp it. For now, I will prepare the material for the stew. Nightingale instead sprinkled the lightly burned mushroom with honey and salt and threw it into her mouth. Well, it was still delicious. Seeing how Anna skillfully mixed all kinds of herbs and other ingredients together, she asked curiously, have you done this often before? Marinating food, grinding flour, going to the nobles and ask for a seasonal work, helping to wash and shave the neighbor's sheep, Anna said. Most of the time I was doing those kinds of odd jobs. The only exception was when I went to Teacher Carl's college. After pausing for a moment, she continued, but when my mother had died, my father no longer let me go to the college, or even allowed me to leave the house in general. Sorry. All of that doesn't matter any longer, it's in the past now. Anna's eyes shined brightly like a sky-blue lake in the moonlight. Compared with the majority of the other witches, I can already be considered as being very lucky, can't I? Over the flame the thin pieces of in butter-coated mushrooms slightly curled up, issuing a crackling sound. After sprinkling some salt grains on top of the mushrooms and roasting them until golden on both sides, a fresh and fragrant smell soon began entering their nostrils. The mix out of the milky flavor of the heated butter and the unique flavor of the bird beak mushrooms caused them to salivating. And with their final honey coating, the roasted mushrooms were finally ready. Whether it was the bird beak mushrooms or the honey, both could be collected in the concealing forest, but even for the locals, if it turned out that there was a beehive on a cut-down tree, or bird beak mushrooms at its top, it was considered a very lucky day. When the pot with the stew released white steam, the two also completed their mushroom roasting and seasoning. "That was a success, or at least it looks good," Nightingale said, stuffing another piece into her mouth. "As it turns out, I also have quite a gift for cooking. PFF. It seems this piece was a bit salty." "The time is also just right," Anna stated after glancing at the night outside of the window. "I presume we should deliver it to His Highness now." "Would you please hand mine over to him?" Nightingale asked, clapping her hands together. "Please. Don't you want to come with me?" "I can't," she laughed. "Because I do not know what kind of expression I should show when I see him now." Anna was startled by the unexpected answer, but before she even could open her mouth to further ask about meaning of this sentence, the other had already disappeared into thin air. "Is it important what kind of expression I show? Regardless if I show a smile, am dispirited or wear an expressionless face, they are all good." Ah. Even when I had just come out of prison, had lost faith in everything, and had all my hope turned to dust, His Highness never became fed up with so why does she want to avoid him? Even after thinking about it for a time, it still felt incomprehensible to her. So, in the end, she only shook her head, picked up the tray with the mushroom dikes and the soup by herself and went to the office. Chapter 240 Award and Honor Ceremony. Roland was currently designing the pattern of the medal for tomorrow's ceremony. It was reasonable to say that he should already have completed this not especially complicated work long ago, but since the beginning of the afternoon, he had felt somewhat ill at ease. That's right, it was because of Nightingale's kiss. Although there had been some indistinct signs before, since she had never acted on it, he had also never taken the initiative to speak about it either. But now, there was no longer any room for doubt. What would be the right way to respond to her feelings? This question also let him understand that he didn't dislike Nightingale at all. Instead, he even somewhat liked her. A beautiful and touching woman with a calm nature, and with whom he was together from morning to night, how could he ever hate her? The reason for Roland's inability to respond positively towards her laid in the 20 years of ideology he had inherited, as well as the actual question he would have to face in the future. Anna's opinion. Especially the later point, he couldn't ignore Anna, and only act according to his own preferences. Perhaps only time could bring him the answer he was looking for. Suddenly, a knocking sound came over from the other side of the door. "Come in, it isn't locked," Roland shouted while being surprised at the same time, who would still come to his office at this hour. Only to see that it was actually Anna who pushed the door open and entered the room, holding a tray with 2 dishes and an earthenware jar. Before she could even open her mouth to speak, Roland already smelled the alluring aroma. "Food?" "Yes," Anna let out a small laugh and placed the tray on the table, then removed the top of the jar and uncovered a milky white soup. "This dish is called honey roasted mushrooms. This plate here was made by me and Nightingale made the other one. And in the jar is mushroom soup. It is seasoned with some commonly seen herbs. It looks very delicious." Roland licked his lips. "Come sit down so that we can eat together." Anna nodded and sat at the opposite side of the table. "Why didn't Nightingale come along?" she said. "She didn't know what kind of expression she should show when she sees you," Anna replied. "I do not quite understand why she cares." "So that's the reason," Roland softly sighed within his heart, although she had bold and confidently said that she didn't felt the least bit of regret, even shamelessly boasted, "This is not your fault, I just did what I wanted to." However, in truth her ability to summon her courage and leave the cave to explore the outside world wasn't any better than that of a squirrel. Really, in the end, was she daring or timid? In that case, let's eat first. When he picked up a piece of mushroom and put it into his mouth, the honey melted and within a flash spread its sweetness within his mouth, soon followed by the mushroom's own juice. In the absence of monosodium glutamate, it was still so rich and tasty that it made him completely speechless. A little salt further enhanced its freshness, and also, the mushroom's own chewy texture, of exquisite tenderness, the taste became simply impeccable. These aren't ordinary mushrooms, right? After swallowing, Roland immediately asked about the aspect of the meal that let it stand out from the masses of other foods. In general, it was already good when the mushrooms could keep their fresh taste when barbecued, but how could they be this juicy? As if they were filled with soup. Well, they are a specialty of the concealing forest. The townspeople call them bird-beak mushrooms. Anna smiled and recounted the mushroom's history. That's why I wanted you to taste them. Afterward, Roland also tasted the slowly cooked mushroom soup, which was equivalently matchless. The flavor of the juices was even more rich. It was just like eating tangbao in general. Furthermore, with every chew a crisp feeling was invoked. Tasting this for a long time, he couldn't help but think of the in later generation extremely commonly used seasoning, which was added in vast amounts to all kind of dishes, MSG. In the time before MSG had appeared, chefs could only enhance the flavor of food indirectly, for example by using whole chicken bones, mushrooms, and soybeans to create a clear soup stock. Although the preceding generations of cooks preferred once more the authentic flavor to show off their own exquisite culinary talent. However, it was still right to say that even if it was a bad or novice chef, as long as they added MSG, they could increase the dull flavor of their food by more than a level. Supposing that the bird-beak mushrooms was naturally so rich and juicy in flavor, they would be the perfect material for extract MSG. They were just growing on top of the trees, making them hard to pick and thus weren't widespread? For Roland, something like this wasn't a problem at all. This type of mushrooms, do you know how many of them are there? I am not sure, but I presume there should be a lot of them, Anna said, taking another small bite. Maggie said that she only circled along the edge of the forest, but she was still able to help me pick a huge bag full of them. That is great to hear. Roland already cleanly finished all the mushrooms Anna had roasted. Thus he stretched out his chopsticks to the second plate. I was worried that there was nothing besides meat dipped in honey or pepper here. I was almost getting tired of eating, PFF. What's wrong? No, nothing. His heart burst into tears. For goodness sake, this piece is salted too much. Did Nightingale accidentally drop it into the salt jar? Even though this were his thoughts, he still swallowed the mushroom. Afterward, Roland discovered that other mushroom pieces weren't completely pasted or cooked. There were also other which were scorched on one side while the other side was left uncooked. Fortunately, the bird-beak mushroom were delicious in itself. In this way it covered up her bad cooking to a large degree. I ate my fill, Roland said, putting his chopsticks down. With great difficulty he had finished eating the second plate, and then he even had drunk the complete soup, until his belly already began to bulge up. Thank you. Thanks, but there was also Nightingale, Anna said with a laugh, letting her look so incredibly adorable that Roland couldn't help but reach out and pinch her nose. The latter whimpered a small cry and then kissed the prince's cheek. Then I'll now go and wash the dishes. Don't forget to go to bed early. After the witch had left, Roland lightly sighed. Although I don't want to ignore Anna's thoughts, but there are some matters which aren't easy to speak about. He helplessly thought, probably this has also something to do with my former identity as a mechanical dog. After all, during my entire academic period, I rarely had any dealings with the opposite sex. And even after graduating and successfully entering a large-scale planning institute, and having a considerable salary, my situation still hadn't changed much. Luckily, there is still a long way to go before the church is completely destroyed, so I have enough time to slowly consider what I need to do next. As for now, it is better to concentrate on completing the work in front of me. On the next morning, Roland stepped onto a temporary erected wooden platform in the town square, which was surrounded by a sea of people. Comparing the current border town with the former impoverished and desolated town, it seemed as heaven and earth had been turned upside down. Saying that it looked completely new wouldn't be an exaggeration. The town's sparse old houses had been completely torn down. Instead, they had been replaced by construction sites and the already finished brick houses scattered all over the place. Furthermore, the latter were constructed in accordance with the development plan of the whole district, giving it a neat and tidy appearance, Although they only occupied 1/3 of the former town's land, they still offered enough space to accommodate the original 2,000 indigenous citizens. By the time they began building 3 or 4 layered houses, as well as opening the follow-up district, the number of people living on the same piece of land would only become more and more. By now, still calling it border town was no longer consistent with the actual situation. No town had a population of nearly 20,000 people and a professional army of about 600 people. However, Roland intended to wait until spring next year before officially promoting Border Town to a real city. With the support of Echo's ability, Roland's voice quickly quieted the crowd down. Today is the day of Border Town's award and honor ceremony. We will use this time to reward and encourage those people who had made a major contribution to all of us. More than half a year has passed since I have arrived here. Since then we have defeated the demonic beasts, beat the Duke, and given this town its current appearance. To achieve all this, many people had to sacrifice a lot. Among these, there are several outstanding people. They are not nobles, nor are they wealthy merchants. Before they served me they were merely ordinary folk, just like you are. He let his view wander over the people, and then loudly exclaimed, "But now they will be rewarded handsomely. Including a medal personally crafted by me, 100 gold royals, and 5 acres of land." This news immediately stirred up the masses, sending waves of cheers through the crowd. Not to mention the medal and the land, just the 100 gold royals, was a sum to cause envy in the others. This isn't a one-time ceremony. From now on we will hold this kind of ceremony each year, regardless of your birth, irrespective of your wealth. As long as you have achieved extraordinary merits you can all obtain this highest of honors. The moment Roland's voice fell, Echo's imitation of a gun salute suddenly resounded through the whole audience, and within the unceasing explosion, Iron Axe, Kyle Sichi, and Nana Pine arrived, escorted by the First Army, and entered the wooden stage.